TV, on radio and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 10.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Sinn Féin say their election victory brings in a new era in politics for Northern Ireland. The Nationalist Party is now the biggest instalment ahead of the DUP. But it could be some time before a new administration's formed due to disagreements between the Nationalist Party and Unionists, including about post-Brexit trade arrangements. The UK has promised an extra £1.3 billion in military aid to help Ukraine defend itself as they fight the Russian invasion. It's the biggest amount of military spending since the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in a dramatic escalation of assistance for Volodymyr Zelensky's forces. Well, it comes as Russia prepares to celebrate Victory Day tomorrow, the anniversary of the day they defeated the Nazis. In recent years, it's become a way to show off military strength with large parades of troops in Moscow. Well, Ben Hodges used to be the commanding general of US forces in Europe, and he says Putin's push to make gains before May the 9th have been the cause of some of his problems.
I think that they were forced to start this latest offensive soon before they were ready, in part, I believe, to have something to show for Monday, tomorrow, for the Victory Day. And so the new offensive was being started before the units had been rebuilt, before they could actually get everything in place.
Meanwhile, 2 people have been confirmed dead and another 60 remain unaccounted for after a Ukrainian school was bombed. Around 90 people were sheltering in the basement of the building in the eastern Luhansk region. The leader of the Labour Party is facing further questions over whether he broke COVID lockdown rules at an MP's office in Durham. There are reports a leaked memo suggested time was set aside for him to eat dinner with colleagues and had beer and curry with others. While police in Durham are investigating Sir Keir Starmer, who says he's confident he didn't breach rules by having a drink and a takeaway at a campaign event. Thousands of people have marched across the United States in support of abortion rights. The pro-choice rallies came just days after a draft US Supreme Court opinion was leaked to the public, suggesting the court is poised to overturn the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade case that legalized abortion nationwide. If overturned, it would mean individual states could decide whether to make it legal or not. And a new leader of Hong Kong has been appointed after a closed voting process in which he was the only candidate. John Lee, a staunch Beijing supporter, oversaw the sometimes violent crackdowns on pro-democracy protesters in 2019. His appointment's widely being seen as a move by the Chinese government to tighten control over the city. Now it's time for today's weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
A dry start for most, but with some low cloud in places. However, this cloud will quickly lift and break to leave many areas fine this morning with sunny spells. Taking a look at the midday picture, the risk of some patchy light rain along the north coast of Scotland. Otherwise, it'll be dry with plenty of sunny spells across the rest of the country. Temperatures around 10 to 16 Celsius. Dry and warm across Northern Ireland too, with sunny spells also stretching across northern England and across much of the Midlands and into Wales. Light winds, but perhaps a little breezy around the coasts. Southern England will also be fine with plenty of warm sunshine. Through the rest of the afternoon, temperatures continue to climb and it'll remain dry for most.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
I'm Jeremy Carl, and this is Talk TV. What makes me really angry? Injustice, lies, and people not able to say what they feel without fear of being just cast aside, cancelled, whatever you want to say.
And a very good morning to everybody. What an amazing day it is as I look outside. The sun is blue. It feels bright. It feels clear. And I hope that you're having a great, great morning. Welcome to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. It's Sunday, the 8th of May. It's just after 10 o'clock. You may still be in bed. You might be enjoying bacon and eggs, whatever. But we have a full-on show. Don't go anywhere. Don't go out and mow the lawn unless you've got some headphones, because you need to listen in to what is a busy, busy show. We've got an election exclusive during my Sunday sermon about what may have gone on and how it went on in Tower Hamlets. The election results that took place on Thursday and announced yesterday. We're going to be talking about the wind farm, the great rip-off, how hundreds of millions of pounds are being ripped off from us, the taxpayer, to the big wind farm developers. We've obviously got to be talking about whether or not a recession is looming, the Bank of England raising interest rates, and of course we'll be talking about the Northern Ireland election results and what that means for the protocol. And I've got a new segment in the third hour of the show. I'm calling it Talk Gear. I'll be talking to Howard Cox about all things motoring. Make sure you don't miss that. And of course, we will be talking about Ukraine. Although it's slipping into further back in the newspapers, it is still a massive, massive crisis for all of us. And we've got some great guests, amazing guests. I've got MPs, I've got 2 professors, experts. And my question to you, my big question is, have you noticed food manufacturers reducing the size of packaging in order to keep the same price of the goods? Have you noticed that? How worried are you by the increasing talk of recession, rising interest rates and food prices? And I want your input, please, because that's how we make it a better show, a more interactive show. So call me, tweet me, text me. Hopefully you know the number. Hopefully it's on the screen. 0344 499 1000. Text talk to 87222. Of course, tweet us at Talk TV. There's all sorts of different ways to watch on the app, which is fantastic. The website, YouTube, Apple TV. There's no excuse not to be watching. You're listening to Tice Talk for the next 3 hours here on Talk TV. Yes, that glorious music means that it's sermon time, Tice's Sunday sermon, when I give my views to listeners, viewers, my supporters, the flock, because this is, of course, the time for people to release their anxieties. If you have concerns, frustrations, then if you ring us through the show, I'll help you at least release those frustrations, even if I can't cure them. And this week, for my Sunday sermon, I'm going to be focusing on the remarkable, the mysterious outcomes and results of democracy and the elections this week. We'll be talking later in the show about what's been the results in Northern Ireland, seismic change potentially coming there. But for the sermon, I want to talk about something closer to these studios. Yes, the results in Tower Hamlets this week, because against all expectations, the good voters of Tower Hamlets have elected Lufta Rahman as their mayor again, despite the fact that he was previously elected in 2014 and then removed from office in 2015 because he was found by the judge of the Electoral Court to have personally been guilty of corrupt and illegal practices. So he was removed from office. The judge described him as ruthless and dishonest, and he was banned for 5 years until last year, coincidentally, funnily enough, 2021, from standing for any elected office. And he was ordered to pay costs of £250,000. The judge said that Mr. Rahman drove a coach and horses through electoral laws and did not care. He was accused of personation of postal votes and at ballot stations, and this is why voter ID at elections is so essential, and why I'm delighted that it has now been passed in the Elections Act of 2022. It's already used in Northern Ireland and dramatically reduced the risks of personation. Now, I should say, Mr. Rahman, of course, denied all the allegations. He was not convicted in a criminal court. But it does seem to me remarkable that anybody essentially found guilty by the Electoral Court of those illegal practices should be allowed to stand again. Now, Mr. Rahman is leader of a political party you may not have heard of, called Aspire. Wonderful motivational name that was launched in 2018. And in April 18, they raised cash of donations, cash donations of £2,225 and non-cash items of just over £7,500. Now, having launched in January 18, of the 45 councillors in Tower Hamlets, 10 of them defected from Labour to this new party, Aspire. But it didn't seem to work out very well for those 10, because in the May 18 elections, all 10 of those councillors lost their seats. Aspire stood in all 45 wards and secured precisely 0 councillors. That was 4 years ago. And of course things change, yes. Because in 2019, Aspire, they did actually win a council ward by-election. So they must have been doing something. And yet, in that same year, 2019, in their annual return to the Electoral Commission, this new political party, Aspire, they said they had no income, no expenditure, and no local activity in Tower Hamlets. So my question is, how could you fight and win a by-election if you had no local activity in Tower Hamlets? And then again in 2020, exactly the same annual return to the Electoral Commission, stating that they had no income, no expenditure, and no local activity in Tower Hamlets. Now, we've not yet seen the 2021 return to the Electoral Commission. What we do know is that in their quarterly returns to the Electoral Commission, they have shown continually, right up until the present day, 0 income. 0 income. Now, let me tell you, I run a political party. I know how hard it is to make people aware of your existence. It takes money, effort, activity, social media, hard work, campaigning. It really does. It's not easy. And then in 2021, Aspire, they won another by-election, a ward by-election in Tower Hamlets. So coming into these elections, they had 2 councillors out of 45. And yet, in these elections, here we are, Mr. Rahman won the mayoralty. Extraordinary. And they've gone the Aspire party. They stood candidates in all 45 wards, and they went from 2 councillors to 24. They've taken control of the council with its budget of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds, and a housing budget approaching, I think, almost £100 million. They've taken the control of this council despite seeming to have no income and no campaigning activity. Well, how have they done this? I mean, this feels unique. It's extraordinary. It's remarkable. Absolutely remarkable. How have they won the mayoralty and control of the council despite no money coming in, no campaigning activity in 2019 or 2020, and seemingly no donations to fund any activity in 2021? And what's also remarkable is the good voters of Tower Hamlets are clearly very engaged in democracy, because they have the highest turnout of any mayoral election across the whole of England in the last 3 years, except Sadiq Khan's London mayoral elections. Remarkable. How have they done this? Is it through social media? Well, let's have a look at their Twitter account, shall we? And here the mystery grows, folks, because their Twitter account, set up in 2018, has the astounding, massive total of 339 followers. Yes, 339 followers. And have they been busy with their Twitter account? Well, they have sent the extraordinary total, in 4 years, of just 88 tweets. 88 tweets. I couldn't find a Facebook page at all. So let's be honest, they ain't big on social media, folks. But maybe they've got an amazing website that sets out all their policies so that we all understand and their voters are impressed by. Guess what? It's the first time I can recall in many, many years they have no website. No website. There's just one page that says, we're building a website. Really? A political party that's won control of a council, won the mayoralty, has no website, no social media presence. What's gone on here? I'm confused, folks. Help me, please. I simply don't understand how you can convince voters to vote for you if you've got no policies, no website, no social media presence, no evidence of any expenditure or donations or campaigning, except there were a few pictures of some leaflets and rosettes over the last few weeks. This, to me, is a mystery. And it raises more questions than answers that I think over the coming days need to be asked by the media and voters in Tower Hamlets. We must ask the Electoral Commission to ask these questions. Who paid for these brochures and these nice rosettes? Have the councillors paid them all themselves? Have the councillors paid into central party funds to help fund the mayoral campaign? How much money has the new mayor, Mr. Rahman, spent on his campaign? Where's the money come from? When will it be declared? Perhaps their spending returns will reveal all. Now, I went to the account last night as the count was finishing, and actually I was lucky enough, briefly, to meet Mr. Rahman. And I asked him to come on the show today to answer these questions to the great viewers and listeners of Talk TV. He said he was tempted, and his team I was put in touch with them. I asked them and I phoned them again this morning, but they declined to come on the show. They're very welcome, of course, to come on the show next week to answer these questions. I think it's important because I'm confused. I need help. How could they achieve these results with no social media, no money, no campaigning activity? It all feels a bit of a mystery to me. Here endeth my Sunday sermon. Well, maybe you've got the answer. Maybe you live in Tower Hamlets or somewhere else. 0344 499 1000. Coming up after the break, we're going to be talking about the Great Wind Farm rip-off. How we are being not told the truth by some of these developers. We'll be talking to Andrew Montford about the cost of energy, the cost of wind farms. Don't go away. Stay with us. You're listening, of course, to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It is Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends, to Tice Talk on this glorious, bright and cheery Sunday morning. And I've just been talking about the extraordinary, the mysterious results in Tower Hamlets. Maybe you can help me on that. You know the number 0344 499 1000. Keep those tweets coming in. Helena says, very enlightening sermon this morning, Richard. This is from Helena. She's wondering where the answers are. Anyway, we need to find out what is going on there. We need the Electoral Commission to look at it very closely. Now, there's another tweet coming here from John who says, I wanted to vote for reform on Thursday, but there was nobody standing in my party. How do we expect change when we can't vote for you? Well, we're really focusing on the general election in 2024 when we will be standing everywhere. So don't you worry about that. Keep those calls coming in. Now, obviously, the cost of living, the cost of our energy bills is the big number one issue. And yet we're told, it seems, and I've been talking about energy for many months now, we're told by the government, MPs, and the Greenies, the environmentalists, that the cost of renewables is plummeting. It's now the cheapest source of energy. But this week, in a remarkable discovery, actually, it seems the opposite's true. It seems that the wind farm developers and promoters and investors may have found an ingenious way to pretend that they're reducing the cost, but actually when it comes to it, they're not. No, they're continuing to charge very high prices that's costing the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds. And to discuss this a bit further, I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Monford, the Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch, who I believe discovered and exposed this anomaly. Andrew, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us on Tice Talk. Good to see you this Sunday morning. So, here we are. We've been told by lots of MPs that wind farms is the cheapest source of energy. It's fantastic. The bids are coming down. We should all be delighted. Gas is the thing of the past. But you seem to have discovered something rather different, and I'd be thrilled if you could help my viewers and listeners as to the truth behind the claims.
Well, the story goes back to about 2017 when the wind farms, a whole lot of wind farms bid to supply electricity to the grid. And the prices at which they bid were much, much lower than anything seen in the past. They were talking £60 a megawatt hour. So that's 6 pence per kilowatt hour in sort of domestic terms, which was about half the price of anything seen before. And this was an overnight transformation. And we raised alarm bells at the time and said, this can't happen. You know, windmills aren't a new technology. You know, they're a mature technology. You know, you get small improvements, not big ones. And we said it was unlikely either the wind farms would never be built, or if they were, essentially they would be gambling on higher prices. Now, what we discovered in April, and you know, I've been waiting for this for 6 months. The first of these very cheap, allegedly, wind farms was meant to come on stream 1st of April, and about 2 or 3 days before, they announced that the date was going back a year. That's within the rules. They're allowed to do that. They don't actually need to hit that particular date. There's quite a lot of flexibility in the contract. So what that means is, instead of selling power at a very low fixed price, they're essentially going out and selling into the free market. And of course, at the moment, market prices are extremely high. So
essentially, Andrew, this supposed sort of headline price that they give, it's not actually a legal obligation, that price. It's almost like an option, a free option for them.
Yeah, essentially, the government has given them an option for, essentially, it could be as much as 2 or 3 years, depending on the particular wind farm. So this one has gone back, you know, the one that I was watching on 1st of April has gone back to April 2023, and essentially they can take another year after that and go back to 2024. Now, they will make potentially of the order of £500 million per year. So they will get an extra £1 billion. One wind farm.
One wind farm could make an additional £500 million.
Correct.
In additional payments, because they're not legally obliged to meet what they claim was their obligation.
Correct. So that's if you think about it in per household terms, you're getting on for £20 per household per year for that one wind farm. And there is, in fact, another wind farm which came live in 3 phases, and phase 3 has gone back to 2023 as well. So essentially, there is no new capacity joining this scheme in 2022. Everybody's gone back.
I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so you've got the government's new energy strategy, which sort of talks glowingly about the low-cost wind farm energy and the plans to have many more wind farm turbines. But here's my concern, that actually what they're doing is they're deliberately bidding low in order essentially to con the government and MPs that it's a low price. So they're promoting essentially the renewable industry against the gas industry and nuclear. So they're saying, we're now the cheapest. But actually, when you look at the small print, the fine print, the detailed print of the contracts, they've got wriggle room. They've got escape clauses.
They have got wriggle room to sort of put the date back and take market prices if market prices are favourable. There's another aspect to this as well, though. When the prices are high, wind farms in the scheme pay back. So it's essentially the subsidy becomes negative. But again, the interesting factor there is that there's no way to actually get that money back to consumers. There's a mechanism for getting it back to energy suppliers, but the energy suppliers don't have to give it back to consumers. So again, the consumer is ripped off again. I mean, you started by saying it's a rip-off, and that's precisely what it is. Whenever you look at these renewable schemes, the consumer has been hung out to dry by successive governments.
I mean, it's just unbelievable that they could have fallen for this, and that essentially these developers have got this optionality. And let's just talk about inflation, because, as we all know, sadly, inflation is going through the roof. And these contracts, they're all linked to inflation, aren't they?
They are. They get an annual price adjustment. So there is an adjustment for inflation, which is, to me, seems very unfair because, of course, almost all of the wind farms' costs have been spent, and therefore they're not subject to inflation. A wind farm, you spend all the money up front building it, and then the ongoing costs are rather low because you have no fuel costs, you just have your maintenance costs. So that's very unfair to the consumer again. But they also get an adjustment for the increasing cost of running the electricity network, the grid costs. And of course, the increasing costs are mainly caused by the arrival of wind farms on the grid. So
exactly.
Again, that is passing the wind farms' costs onto other forms of generation and onto consumers.
So let's be clear. Currently, the renewable subsidies is about 10 billion a year, going up by inflation every year. So essentially, 10% inflation, which the Bank of England have just forecast, that's another billion. And then you've just identified last week another potentially 500 million quid that's going to be added from just one wind farm alone. Correct.
As I say, I reckon the total probably for this the next 12 months will be about £750 million. All the existing wind farms that are in this scheme, the contracts for difference scheme, have all just had their annual uplift to their
absolutely,
prices.
And it's going to go on.
It's 7 or 8%.
Andrew, that's fascinating. I'm going to get you back on because we've got to keep talking about this. Thank you so much for your time this morning. That's Andrew Monford, Deputy Director at Net Zero Watch. We're going to break for the news, and then I'm going to be taking your calls, your tweets, your messages. You know the number. It's Tice Talk here on Talk TV.
I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and this is Talk TV. I think my most memorable and proudest moment in journalism over all these years is actually being on air during the lockdowns, even when I had COVID myself. Over the last 2 years, getting people to tell their stories, not just about people who lost loved ones to COVID, but people who lost their fundamental freedoms, their children's schooling, their mental health, their physical health, their businesses, and giving people the chance to tell their stories about how it affected them.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Sinn Féin say their election victory brings in a new era in politics for Northern Ireland. The Nationalist Party is now the biggest instalment ahead of the DUP, but it could be some time before a new administration's formed due to disagreements between the Nationalist Party and Unionists, including about post-Brexit trade arrangements. The UK has promised an extra £1.3 billion in military aid to help Ukraine defend itself as they fight the Russian invasion. It's the biggest amount of military spending since the wars in Ukraine and Afghanistan, in a dramatic escalation of assistance for Volodymyr Zelensky's forces. Well, it comes as Russia prepares to celebrate Victory Day tomorrow, the anniversary of the day they defeated the Nazis. In recent years, it's become a way to show off military strength, with large parades of troops in Moscow. Well, Ben Hodges used to be the commanding general of US forces in Europe, and he says Putin's push to make gains before May the 9th have been the cause of some of his problems.
I think that they were forced to start this latest offensive soon before they were ready. In part, I believe, to have something to show for Monday, tomorrow, for the Victory Day. And so the new offensive was being started before the units had been rebuilt, before they could actually get everything in place.
Meanwhile, 2 people have been confirmed dead and another 60 remain unaccounted for after a Ukrainian school was bombed. Around 90 people were sheltering in the basement of the building in the eastern Luhansk region. And a new leader of Hong Kong has been appointed after a closed voting process in which he was the only candidate. John Lee, a staunch Beijing supporter, oversaw the sometimes violent crackdowns on pro-democracy protesters in 2019. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. I hope you've been enjoying my Sunday sermon. And that discussion there that we just had with Andrew Modford about the great wind farm rip-off that is going on. And Lucy, she quite rightly tweets in, could we have a windfall tax on wind farms, please? Wind and wind. Yeah, there seems to be lots of wind around the wind farms, I think. And I was actually talking about this just on Friday, I think, with Mike Graham, that I'm actually supportive of a windfall tax on the energy producers from the North Sea, the likes of Shell and BP. But let's have a windfall tax on the vast, vast profits being made by the wind farms. Yes, because of these huge inflation subsidies. Lucy, I think you are quite right. Well, we're going to take some calls now. Keep those calls coming in, 0344 499 1000. And first up this morning, we've got Graham, who I think is in Solihull. Morning, Graham.
Good morning, Richard.
How's life in Solihull this morning? Is it bright and cheery as well?
It's very sunny. It's very sunny. Very nice. But listen, goodness gracious, I'm so pleased to be here with you. But I want to know why the hell I haven't got an option to vote for a party that will give me something, that will give me a different option. Listen, because people here are struggling. I'm not struggling. It doesn't matter to me. Honestly, and I'm not being horrible or anything. It doesn't matter to me that the prices go up. I have enough money but there are people here that are struggling. They are...
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question, Graham. You know, there are millions and millions of people up and down the country. Solihull, the whole width and breadth of the country, people are struggling without question.
So I don't listen to useless saying, oh, let them eat whatever he said last week. I was listening with disdain. I was thinking, my goodness, is this a guy that who I vote for? I vote Conservative, but I don't feel the Conservatives do anything for me anymore. Obviously, I'm not going to vote for those muppets, the wet and the loose and the lefties and the useless.
Well, the thing about the Conservative is they used to be the party of low tax, but that seems to have disappeared, and it's quite amusing to hear the Labour Party now claim that the Conservatives are the party of high tax and low growth. Something very strange has gone on.
Richard, but they have got a point.
They absolutely have got to be. That's why I created this new name, Graham.
That's what I hate. Where is Mrs. Thatcher, right? Where is Mrs. Thatcher in all this? I know people, I know she destroyed the miners and everything, and I do have sympathies with that. But she needs to destroy the... She needed to destroy the unions. That's what she needed to do, because they had so much power, and they brought this country down. And now we've got rid of that. Richard, we've got rid of that.
We've got rid of that. We've got so much more opportunity, but they're not taking advantage of it.
I agree, 100%. And I want to know why your party, because we are struggling now. We're struggling with Boris. I like Boris. I've met him. I won't say any more about that, but I met him and I like him. He's a nice guy. He's a lovely fellow chap.
Look, Boris is engaging. He's a great salesman.
Yes.
But he has a very mysterious relationship with the truth. I think let's just leave it at that, Graham. Well, look,
I think he has a mysterious relationship with his wife, and that's no problem. But he should stop listening to his wife and start listening to.
He won't be alone in that, Graham. That's for sure.
Well, I know. Well, I know. But he should stop doing that. He's the Prime Minister. Listen, I'm not the Prime Minister. I wouldn't listen to my... if I had a wife, I'd probably listen to it.
Oh, dear. Graham, I've got to take some other calls, but thank you for that. Well, certainly at the next general election, trust me, we're going to be standing candidates up and down the country so that people do have a choice, because then democracy actually is the winner. If you have more debate, more options, more discussion, different types of policies to review with the nation, then actually the winner really are the voters with more options. Thank you very much, Graham, for your thoughts there this morning. We're going to head down from Solihull to Ashford, where I think Lenny is patiently waiting. Morning, Lenny.
Good morning, Richard. I am an old age pensioner, and I've got a little cottage that's 10 metres by 3 metres, and that is it. And I'm with the EDF, and they've changed my standard charge from £1 a day to £2 a day. So it's very difficult for me to cut back on electric, because I'm not saying the majority of my bill is my standard charge.
Yeah, you're so right, Lenny. And of course, lots of people focus on, the rate per unit and what the rate is, without actually looking at that very point, the standing charge. I was just looking at someone's bill only yesterday and saw that the standing charge had doubled, and it sounds like yours has doubled too. And do you know where that standing charge mainly goes to, Lenny?
No, I don't.
Well, I'll tell you what it pays for. That pays for the increase in the transmission costs, the increase in the network costs, the operating costs, in order to, guess what, link up and service all of the wind farms, all of the new renewable energy that's coming into the grid. That's what that standing charge pays for. So, and that now totals some $5 billion a year. That's what Andrew Monfort was just talking about.
Well, I tell you, I can, now you've explained it to me, but that doesn't make sense, because old pensioners like myself, now, if I go and stay away, if I go and visit a family for 1 or 2 weeks and I stay away, when I come back, I've used no electricity and I've still got the same bill.
This is the point, and I think it's so unfair in that there's nothing you can do about the standing charge, and in a sense we haven't got the same level of competition that we did have, because these standing charges are almost the same across the board, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about it, is there, Lenny?
Well, we're obviously a very easy target, and I am very, very sorry that Margaret Thatcher privatised them all, and because what it seems like, the country's got no control over what we pay for our electric.
You're so right. Actually, all of the utilities, having been sold off, we've lost control, and they can be owned by any, Lenny, and that's why actually I believe we should renationalise 50% of all our utilities, and the other 50% should be owned by British pension funds. Still have private sector management, but have 50% owned by the taxpayer. That way, actually you get a win-win. Lenny, thank you so much for your call. That was Lenny in Ashford with his concerns about the size of the standing charge. Have you looked at your standing charge? Have you seen how you're being ripped off by the increase in the network costs? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. We've got a tweet here from Barry, who says, I understand Talk TV has Richard Tice chatting with someone about wind farms. Bet he doesn't give Caroline Lucas the opportunity to correct him. Hashtag climate action now. Barry, I'd love Caroline to come on. We've invited her. I've invited people from the Labour Party. They won't come on. They won't discuss this stuff. I wonder why. What are they afraid of? We can have a healthy, open discussion. We can agree to disagree in a respectful, polite way. I just want them to come on. If you know Caroline, Barry, please tell her. Get on my show. Correct me where I'm wrong. I want to hear. Anyway, stay with us because we're going to be talking to Julian Jessup after the break about the Bank of England raising rates. It's Tice Talk. It is Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk this Sunday morning. It's bright, and we've been discussing the extraordinary election results in Tower Hamlets and also the great wind farm rip-off. Grandad here tweets in, it's amazing what postal voting and a few willing helpers can do. Maybe that's one of the answers. So that's interesting from Grandad. Meanwhile, on the wind farms, Jack says, can we get the Energy Minister or perhaps the Prime Minister to respond to these revelations about wind farms? Well, we are going to ask the Energy Minister on. We'd love to have any minister on to answer this because it's absolutely vital. We understand the real cost of this because it's adding to everybody's bills. Now, talking of adding to bills, the Bank of England this week have raised interest rates from the base rate from 0.75% to 1%, with an indication they're probably going to go higher still. And because of all the noise about the elections and Northern Ireland that we'll be talking about later, what didn't really get much coverage, seems to me, was their suggestion that actually next year we're heading into a recession, potentially a sharp recession. And this is really significant because this is completely different to what was forecast by the Office of Budget Responsibility back at the time of the budget in March. So I'm delighted to be joined now by Julian Jessup, who is an economist and a fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Julian, a very good morning to you. It's bright and cheery out there, but I have to say the economic news and the impact on people's bank accounts is not so bright nor cheery, is it?
No, it's certainly looking pretty grim. I've got to say that I think the Bank of England's forecasts were too pessimistic. That's partly because of the way that they forecast the numbers. They basically assume no change in government policy and no easing of the pressure from global energy prices. So on the basis of that, then there's a good chance that, yes, inflation might go above 10% by the end of the year. And will it get at least one quarter where the economy actually shrinks outright? But I think realistically that the government will do more in the autumn. It might be a little too late for some people, but I think the government can't allow prices to rise that much. And so we will avoid a technical recession. But it's still going to feel very difficult for most people, even if the economy continues to grow. It's still going to feel very tough, particularly for low-income households who are most vulnerable to the surge in the cost of living that we're seeing at the moment.
And let's be clear, when the bank raises interest rates, essentially anybody on a floating rate mortgage or has got an overdraft or is taking out a new mortgage, or indeed companies likewise, you're paying more money to your bank. So money is going out of your account. And if the bank keeps raising rates, which it's tempted to do in order to try and use as probably almost the only lever it's got, then essentially what it's doing is it's going to make the recession or the potential downturn even worse than it would otherwise be.
Well, I think it's important to take a longer-term view here. I mean, the reason why the Bank of England is raising interest rates, and why I actually think it should be doing it more aggressively, is to get inflation down over the medium to longer term. As it is, interest rates are still extraordinarily low. And in fact, the increase that we saw last week won't actually affect most people because a lot of borrowing is now fixed. It's linked to longer-term interest rates anyway. So I think the near-term impact on the economy of higher interest rates is small. But in the longer term, it could actually help. If we can get inflation expectations back down again, we can make it more likely that the temporary spike in inflation that we're seeing now doesn't become permanent. And that would do far more harm to household finances than small increases in interest rates now.
OK, so you're really looking more at the medium-term impact to sort of to set expectations, because my concern is that actually raising rates will just make a difficult situation even worse. I may have lost Julian, but we'll hopefully get him back. But as I say, my concern is that raising rates makes a difficult situation even worse, because most of the current inflation that actually we're experiencing is what I call cost inflation. It's the cost of the extra energy bills in businesses. It's the cost of the higher costs of imports, of food and things. All those costs are going up. Wage rates are going up. And so it's what I call cost inflation. Prices coming out of goods coming out of China are going up. So you've got cost inflation, and my concern is that interest rate rises just make that situation worse. I think we've got Julian back. I was just saying, Julian, my concern is that it's more cost inflation coming through rather than demand inflation.
Well, that's right. I mean, next to nothing that the Bank of England can do about these global cost pressures. And I think anybody's suggesting that raising interest rates aggressively now would have a significant impact on inflation over the next few months. Instead, it's about making sure that increase in cost pressures doesn't become permanent. And that is where monetary policy is more powerful. It's also, by the way, not just about interest rates. I mean, it's not the only tool that the Bank of England has got. I think actually the more important point is what's happening to the money supply. The main reason why inflation is as high as it is now is that central banks around the world, not just the Bank of England, but also in the US and the rest of Europe, have been printing enormous amounts of essentially free money and pumping it into the economy. I think it's also important, therefore, that central banks start to take some of that excess money back. And that, again, I think will have a bigger impact on inflation over the medium to longer term.
Interesting. You talked about a temporary spike in inflation. I mean, 10% inflation is something that many people have never seen. Even the likes of you and I, we haven't seen it for 30-plus years. And a lot of people are concerned that actually it may not just be a temporary spike, that it may be 2 or 3 years worth. And the bank did allude to that, didn't they?
Well, that's certainly the risk. There are a number of ways in which a temporary spike in inflation can become permanent. One is through expectation. So if we all expect inflation to remain high and people therefore start asking for bigger wage increases and companies keep raising prices, then it almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that's why it's really important to bear down on inflation expectations. And there I think the Bank of England has failed by only raising rates by a quarter point. That's no more than the markets were expecting. That doesn't surprise anybody, and therefore it's almost not worth doing. The other thing is clawing back some of this huge amount of excess money that's been pumped into economies. Yes. And other central banks are starting to do that. The Bank of England has punted that into the long grass again, isn't willing to start doing it until in the autumn at the earliest, and I think that's too late.
What I'm concerned about is, Julian, that no one's talking about cutting taxes, because if you cut taxes hard, you dramatically ease the cost of living crisis, and actually if, for example, you put, let's say, 5% more into the net take-home pay of someone on an average salary, then actually that makes it easier to resist the higher wage demands from inflation. And that might be a better way of trying to bear down on inflation than suffering the huge wage demands of 6, 7, 8% plus.
Well, that's a really good point. I mean, one of the reasons why people are asking for higher wages at the moment is, for many of them, their tax bills have gone up because national insurance has increased. So I think the bigger picture here is that the whole macroeconomic policy framework is a mess. On the one hand, monetary policy is too loose, so interest rates are too low. But on the other side, fiscal policy is too tight. And it's never a good time to be raising taxes. But now it's completely bonkers. We should be cutting taxes and also protecting the real value of benefits to make sure that the most vulnerable households are not hit even harder than they need to be by this big increase in the cost of living. So I'm afraid both the government and the central bank have got it wrong.
Julian, that's brilliant. You and I agree we should be cutting taxes hard. Thank you so much. That's Julian Jessup, fellow at the Institute of Economic Affairs, about the Bank of England's strategy on interest rates. Just before we get to the top of the hour, we're going to take a call, I think, back on the issue of this extraordinary election and my Sunday sermon in Tower Hamlets. And I think we've got Paul on the line. Paul, good morning. Are you living in Tower Hamlets?
Morning, Richard. Yes, I live in Bethnal Green, Tower.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Paul. So have you got an answer to my confusion about what's happened here?
Well, I think I've got a few answers. The first, I think the whole community was quite disappointed with these low-traffic neighbourhoods that were imposed on us just as lockdown begun. Right. So we've had plant pots put all over the place. Traffic is a nightmare. So this new mayor, Mr. Rahman, has decided that he'll get rid of those. So I think he picked up a few votes where he normally wouldn't.
Interesting.
From the local. That is for sure, because some of my neighbours who normally would never vote, they would either vote Labour or Conservatives, even if the Conservatives don't get anywhere in Tower Hamlets. But on this occasion, they have.
Fascinating.
Yes, but I don't think that's too many votes. I think the real issue, and this happens every time there's a local election, the Asian community are very quite tight-knit together, and they get together, the word spreads, you have to vote for him, please vote for him, and they're encouraged to do so. And I've been told this by a good friend of mine who is in the Asian community, and especially, he said, the postal votes. They get encouraged to get a postal vote. He's not saying that someone else fills the vote in for them. He's saying they get encouraged to put the X on this gentleman because he's going to help us more, he's going to do this, this and this.
Interesting.
And, yeah, it is quite interesting. And in response to, you said that they had there wasn't much, media. They don't have a lot on their website, but there are a couple of Twitter accounts, and I can name one. It's called One Tower Hamlets. And for the last 2 years, they've been bombarding everyone saying the Labour mayor's no good, the councillors are no good, these are the reasons, and a lot of it's been just put out there through very small different channels, and it's all tight-knit in the Asian community, and that's what we see at every election.
So there's a group of other Twitter accounts. I mean, in fairness, I completely agree with Mr. Rahman on the low-traffic neighbourhoods. We've been campaigning to remove those. But I am concerned about these postal votes, because last year, in the council elections, I saw armfuls of postal votes being carried in a sack into the polling station, which remarkably is legal. It is legal, but it does concern me.
Yeah, look, I can give you an example also. A few years, the last time they had the elections in Tower Hamlets, 4 years ago, I can't remember. I do a postal vote, but at the two or 3 weeks before, I also received a card to go down to the polling station, which I thought, well, how can I receive, why are you sending me this? I've already voted by post.
Right.
And that was some concern to me. And I phoned through and told the council, and it was just like pushed to one side. Something's happening in this council. Every election it doesn't surprise me. I don't know what's going on. Well, someone's got to look into it.
Well, that's why I did my Sunday's sermon. Paul, thank you so much for your thoughts. That's fascinating. Actually, a policy specific. And Helena also tweeted, and maybe other sermons, not just my Sunday sermon, but other sermons from the imams in the mosques, may well be spreading that message, as Paul just alluded to. Keep those calls coming, 0344 499 1000, or tweet us at Talk TV with your thoughts, your views on everything we're discussing. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Carol Sikora, the oncologist, about the latest excess death statistics. You are, of course, listening to Tice Talk on Talk TV.
TV, on radio and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 11.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. Sinn Féin say their election victory brings in a new era in politics for Northern Ireland. The Nationalist Party is now the biggest instalment ahead of the DUP. But it could be some time before a new administration's formed due to disagreements between the Nationalist Party and unionists, including about post-Brexit trade arrangements. The UK has promised an extra £1.3 billion in military aid to help Ukraine defend itself as they fight the Russian invasion. It's the biggest amount of military spending since the wars in Iraq and in Afghanistan, in a dramatic escalation of assistance for Volodymyr Zelensky's forces. It comes as Russia prepares to celebrate Victory Day tomorrow, the anniversary of the day they defeated the Nazis. In recent years, it's become a way to show off military strength with large parades of troops in Moscow. Well, Ben Hodges used to be the commanding general of US forces in Europe, and he says Putin's push to make gains before May the 9th have been the cause of some of his problems.
I think that they were forced to start this latest offensive soon before they were ready. In part, I believe, to have something to show for Monday, tomorrow, for the Victory Day. And so the new offensive was being started before the units had been rebuilt, before they could actually get everything in place.
Meanwhile, 2 people have been confirmed dead and another 60 remain unaccounted for after a Ukrainian school was bombed. Around 90 people were sheltering in the basement of the building in the eastern Luhansk region. The Labour Party has dismissed the latest claims that Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules by drinking beer and eating a curry with colleagues. The Mail on Sunday suggests the takeaway at a campaign event was planned, and police in Durham are investigating. Sir Keir says he's confident he didn't breach rules. Thousands of people have marched across the United States in support of abortion rights. The pro-choice rallies came days after a draft US Supreme Court opinion was leaked to the public, suggesting the court is poised to overturn the landmark 1973 Roe v. Wade case that legalized abortion nationwide. If overturned, it would mean individual states could decide whether to make it legal or not. And a new leader of Hong Kong has been appointed after a closed voting process in which he was the only candidate. John Lee, a staunch Beijing supporter, oversaw the sometimes violent crackdowns on pro-democracy protesters in 2019. His appointment is widely being seen as a move by the Chinese government to tighten control over the city. And now it's time for today's weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
A dry start for most, but with some low cloud in places. However, this cloud will quickly lift and break to leave many areas fine this morning with sunny spells. Taking a look at the midday picture, the risk of some patchy light rain along the north coast of Scotland. Otherwise, it'll be dry with plenty of sunny spells across the rest of the country. Temperatures around 10 to 16 Celsius. Dry and warm across Northern Ireland too, with sunny spells also stretching across northern England and across much of the Midlands and into Wales. Light winds, but perhaps a little breezy around the coasts. Southern England will also be fine with plenty of warm sunshine. Through the rest of the afternoon, temperatures continue to climb and it'll remain dry for most.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
I'm Jeremy Carl, and this is Talk TV. What makes me really angry? Injustice, lies, and people not able to say what they feel without fear of being just cast aside, cancelled, whatever you want to say.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios this Sunday morning. We're into the second hour. Lots of tweets, lots of messages coming in about my Sunday sermon. I've looked at the One Tower Hamlets Twitter feed. There's a bit there, but I want to understand more about what's really going on. And just to repeat what I said earlier, I did meet Mr. Rahman at the Count last night. I asked him on the show, and I repeat this call live on air. There's 2 hours to go Mayor Rahman, really welcome to have you on the show to explain how you've achieved this remarkable result together with your councillors. Absolutely outstanding. Please do give us a call, come on Zoom, and we'll get you on the show without any question. Meanwhile, we need to be looking also at another remarkable bit of data that's come out over recent days, which is the excess deaths across a whole range of different nations. Data provided by the World Health Organization. Excess deaths in 2020 and 21, obviously across almost all of the period of COVID. And some of these results are absolutely remarkable, because many of us were concerned that the focus on lockdowns because of COVID was going to cause huge collateral damage elsewhere, for example, with people who might be suffering from cancer, from lung disease, from heart disease. And I really want to focus on what happened with Sweden, because I thought Sweden was an outstanding example. They didn't have a full lockdown. They gave guidance. They made voluntary suggestions to people. And they were almost sort of slated by the mainstream media, particularly here in the UK, and the pro-lockdown advocates. And actually, it turns out that, according to World Health Organization, Sweden's excess deaths from all deaths in 2020 and 21 was, guess what? Was one of the lowest of all the countries it studied, was half the rate in the United Kingdom. So hang on, we were told that you had to lock down to save lives and protect the NHS. And it turns out, folks, we didn't save lives, Sweden didn't lock down, and actually they saved more lives. There were less excess deaths. And we didn't protect the NHS because the NHS is a worse state than ever. Well, let's have some clarity on this with my next guest. I'm delighted to be joined now by the Professor Carol Sikora, oncologist, Director of Rutherford Health. Carol, a very good morning to you. Well, you and I have spoken on many occasions, and we've all taken a sort of a battering from the pro-lockdown advocates, saying that we would cause more deaths. But I think some of this data is quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. It's very clear, Richard. And what it is, it's excess deaths for any cause. The problem with COVID deaths, what makes a COVID death? Most people that have COVID, 28 days before they're admitted to hospital, if they die, if they have a heart attack, if they die naturally in their old age, they're counted as a COVID death. So the only real way to look to get rid of different countries' approaches to what constitutes a COVID death is to look at absolute excess. And top in the world of absolute excess is Peru. And no one can explain this. I got back from Peru last night, actually. I have a granddaughter living in Lima, and it was her 15th birthday, which is a big deal in Latin America. And the doctors there are really puzzled why Peru should be at the top. And of course, it means that everyone's frightened. You have to double mask to walk on the streets still, and things like that, because people are frightened. So as you go down the list, we're sort of halfway down, as you suggest, and Sweden is right at the bottom. And it's sort of inexplicable, except that lockdown is not a powerful tool to reduce the death rate. That's the clear conclusion.
And it is very interesting because, in fairness, some of the pro-lockdown advocates, their response to this is, well, hang on, look at Sweden's immediate neighbours, the likes of Norway and Finland, and they've had even lower excess deaths than Sweden, which is remarkable. But it feels to me that you have to look at the overall picture. And my concern, for example, here in the UK, the increase in excess deaths of people at home who were sort of, they morally felt they had to do the right thing and not trouble the hospital, not trouble the NHS. That led to a dramatic increase.
That's completely correct. And the other problem in assessing the data is that lockdowns in different countries meant different things. Here we had a very sort of British lockdown. It wasn't totally enforced. OK, people did get fined, but very few. And you certainly, compared to Portugal, where there, not only did you get fined if you were on the street without a reason, but neighbours were encouraged to phone in to report people that were leaving their house for no reason, and they'd get €100 reward. This is something at a different level than we had, so that different lockdown strategies meant that when you look at this data, it's more complex than it seems. But Sweden is a key example where there was very little lockdown. It was left to people to decide if they wanted to avoid crowds, just as we have today. I mean, arriving at Heathrow last night, it was a breath of fresh air to see nobody wearing masks, everybody relaxed. And, you know, the trouble is there are always the naysayers that don't like it. They want to enforce something, and some of them have a vested interest in the pandemic coming back and continuing. And when you look at this data, it's clear we got it wrong, as probably did Peru, who had a very fierce lockdown.
Well, I think that's right, and it's the importance of looking at the bigger picture. And you know, different countries did measure COVID deaths differently. I think that there are many suggestions that we were pretty aggressive in the way that we put COVID on death certificates. Whereas I think it was Norway that when there was a positive COVID result, they actually insisted that they did a second test to double check and to verify. So actually the real measure is this one of excess deaths, isn't it?
It is, and this is the only measure that goes forward. And obviously it takes time for that to mature. It's matured for 20 and 21. What we'll have to look at is the 5-year picture. And there's going to be a huge number of publications coming out on this, looking back at the data, comparing different countries. Because what we need to know for future, if there's another pandemic with a similar virus, what we have to do. It's scared people silly. I travel on the train to London regularly, and you can see people still heavily gloves, masks, bottles of disinfectant. I call it the COVID theatre. It's just a theatrical display of fear. And different countries have got different levels. And so we've got to get out of it somehow.
I think we have, because much of that scare and that fear was created by the UK government's propaganda.
It was. I mean, the Piccadilly Circus, I'll never forget the picture of the actress with a mask on, having oxygen, looking as though she's dying, and protect the NHS was down below, as though you were going to save a life by not going to a doctor because you've got chest pain. And that was the implication, and that indeed happened.
And you touched just then on the importance of learning lessons, and I hope, but I'm not that confident, that lessons have been learned, because, of course, it turns out that the pre-pandemic advice from the WHO, which was pretty akin to the Great Barrington Declaration and what Sweden did, actually it looks like that was closer to the right advice.
It was. And, you know, the WHO said at the beginning not to have international borders where you're dealing with COVID. In other words, don't have any barriers to travel. And, of course, every country did it differently. I mean, Australia, New Zealand had rigid, it's only just last week you could go to New Zealand anyway. So, and other countries had ridiculous forms to fill, vaccination passports in places, and even Britain, I mean, the most ridiculous, complex form for people to fill in. I travelled at the very beginning when they introduced the form just to go to Brussels, and it was, you know, it took me an afternoon to work out what I was going to put in this passenger locator form.
It's a nightmare. Thank heavens we're not still. Just finally, Carol, before you go, cancer obviously is your specialism. The cancer lists are obviously increasing through the COVID period. Is there evidence now that actually the private use, the use of private cancer treatment and diagnostics and capacity is being increased, either by people paying to go private or by the NHS?
No, it is on both sides. NHS contracted to the private sector, and people self-paying that don't have medical insurance because they can't get in. I mean, the NHS has not recovered, and it won't recover for the next 2 years. And so there'll be excess cancer deaths to come.
That's a shame. Well, not good news to end on. Carol, thank you so much for joining me this Sunday morning. Really do appreciate it. That was Professor Carol Sikora, oncologist, who was with us during the whole of the COVID period, saying you had to look at the collateral damage of the lockdown policy. We're going to take a quick call before the break from Simon, who is in Basingstoke. Morning, Simon.
Yes, good morning. I think the Bank of England and the central banks are about to be taught a harsh lesson by the bond market. Germany's been, for the German government to borrow money for several years, you've had to pay the German government. This week, the German 10-year Bund was 1%. And the US 10-year Treasury is over 3%. If that goes up to 5%, then technically the US government is bankrupt. Because if you work out what 5% of $30 trillion is, that's more than the US raises each year in taxes.
Which essentially means it won't go to 5%, doesn't it?
Well, the question is, can central governments now, central banks and governments stop that from happening? I think that what happened in 2008 and the lowering rates to the lowest levels they've been in 300 years is finally coming home to roost. The effects of 40 years of globalization, of global supply chains is coming home to roost.
Interesting, because actually whilst you've just been talking, Simon, a tweet's come in from Johnny who says, your guest was right, the Bank of England needed to relieve the excess QE sooner, and that QE will be the biggest factor in this inflation, and autumn will be too late to raise rates.
It is, and raising rates, what will it achieve? If I can increase rates to 10%, will that plant a single grain of wheat?
No.
Will it produce a single new microprocessor?
That's my concern, is that it will trigger a deeper recession without actually curing the cost side of inflation.
That's true, and I think that the true tragedy is that since Brexit we have a lot more freedom and we haven't used it. And we also have a Conservative government that's not willing to take a long view and say, OK, we need to make energy cheap again, because when energy is cheap, the economy will be successful.
Well, I've been absolutely banging the drum, and we'll keep doing so, Simon, for cheaper energy. But I think we've got to cut taxes as well. Simon, thank you so much for those thoughts. It's not easy, but we've got to take action because we have an emerging economic crisis. Stay with us. We're going to be taking your calls, 0344 499 1000. You're listening to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, live from the Talk Radio studios. We're well into the second hour of my show. Lots of messages and tweets coming in. One here from JC about the last caller, Simon. He says, blimey, where did you get Simon from? Somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. Absolutely fantastic. Thanks very much. Hopefully Simon is still listening. Another message here from Tim who says, Richard, here's a thought. How about voting, photo voter ID and compulsory voting? Well, certainly voter ID, I think it's with a photo, is now going to be brought in, hopefully, for the next round of elections. Compulsory voting is another whole thing again. I believe in Australia they have compulsory voting. You can abstain once you get there, spoil your ballot paper, but at least you've given the thought. You've actually tried, potentially engaged with the political process. I think it's certainly worth an interesting debate. Now, another tweet that's come in here from Testament 131, which is a really interesting point. Sorry, Richard, you said Norway was lower with excess deaths than Sweden, which I did, and which is correct under the WHO data. We, Norway, so I think Testament is actually tweeting from Norway, had lockdowns, working from home, and mask wearing everywhere. And I think that, I know that is true, and thanks for re-clarifying that. And Norway essentially has had zero excess deaths. They had very low COVID deaths reported throughout the whole process. But what struck me, and perhaps Testament can clarify, is any positive COVID test then had to be retested to make sure that it really was COVID, and maybe therefore they've just got greater accuracy. I'm not sure. Maybe they've got a better healthcare system. Who knows? But if you've got a view on that, then let us know by tweet at Talk TV or giving us a call. Now, we're heading up to Manchester, where we've got a call from Steve. Good morning, Steve.
Hello, Richard.
How are you doing?
I'm not too bad. I'm in trouble now, so I've just left her shopping inside Home Bargains, but I'm all right.
Fantastic. What's on your mind this morning, Steve?
My question to you was, why wasn't Reform Party on my form when I went to vote? Where are you?
We're very much here, Steve, and thanks. There are about 5,000 different council seats up for grabs in the election, and even the main parties weren't able to fill every seat, have a candidate in every seat across the country. We're growing, Steve, and we want to have more candidates, but our real focus is, of course, in the general election, which we think will be mid-24, has to be by the end of 24, where we will be standing everywhere across the whole of England, Scotland and Wales. So we'll have 600-plus candidates. So we will be there then, Steve.
I just feel like at the moment the silent majority have got no one to vote for.
Well, Steve, I think you're right. And, it's work in progress. As I say, the target and the objective is to make sure we've got 600-plus at the general election, so that then you have got different options, different people to vote for, and we can have a broader debate about what we think are the common sense solutions to the massive challenges the country faces.
I just feel like you're always having a dig at the government, which I totally agree, but you don't do anything about it. I don't see you on the streets. I don't see you anywhere. So sometimes people, why just stand back and just let everybody else get on with it? It really annoys me.
Yeah, no, look, it's a fair point, Steve. Well, I tell you what, you will see us, because there is going to be a by-election just not far from you in Wakefield. We believe it'll be in June, and assuming it is in June, then we, like many other parties, will, I'm sure, be there, and that'll be the first Red Wall by-election.
I really do.
Yeah, so that'll be an interesting opportunity for all the parties, including Reform, to put their case. Steve, thank you very much for your call, your thoughts. That was Steve from Manchester. We are going to head from Manchester back down to Tring, where we've got Chris. Morning, Chris.
Morning.
What are your thoughts this morning? Great you called. Thanks very much.
I meant to ring. Well, I was talking about when the economist was on a bit earlier on. My issue is the rise in interest rates, because the way I see it is, at the moment we've got supply-led inflation. You get either demand-led or supply-led inflation. In other words, materials and services are expensive. There's more demand than supply, as in electricity, chips for cars. So that's forcing prices up. You've got a labour shortage in certain areas, which is forcing price of wages up, which is an inflation pressure as well. And you don't combat that by increasing interest rates on the pretext that it'll encourage savers, because 1%, one, doesn't encourage savers, and two, it becomes part of the process that puts the prices up. Surely you should attack it by, even if in the short term you print more money, which can be inflationary, put some more spending power into the economy, create more jobs, and then start all over again.
Chris, I'm completely with you. I agree with you entirely. We've got cost inflation, not demand inflation, from the higher input costs. That's what's driving essentially prices up. All increasing rates will do is essentially it will accelerate and deepen the depth of whatever type of recession faces us and awaits us. I'm with you. I would be cutting taxes and growing your way out of the crisis, but essentially have a cap on public sector wage increases.
Yeah, I mean, what puzzles me a bit, it's not just this country. Everyone's following exactly the same example. They're all reacting in totally the wrong way. I mean, to me, it's just basic Keynesian economics. That, you know, I mean, you were taught in sixth form like 400 years ago whenever I was at school. It's just basic stuff. I can't believe that people are falling for it.
I'm afraid you're right, Chris, and it is depressing, and I think it's going to lead to unnecessarily deeper and longer trouble. Chris, thank you so much for that call. Chris is another great caller from Talk TV who also knows what he's talking about. Kim, good morning. Have we got you in Blackpool? I heard a strange sound there, which potentially means that we've lost Kim. We'll try and get Kim back. Meanwhile, we've got some great tweets in here. We've got one. Jill has tweeted in, Bridgend Council votes must be double-checked and recounted to include all postal votes. Why? Why do you think, Mr. Tice? The honest answer is I don't know what's going on at Bridgend Council, but if you've got any more intelligence, then please do let me know. I think we've got Kim back. Hi there, Kim.
Hi. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Yeah, fine. What's on your mind? We've got 2 minutes.
Okay, I've got 2 minutes, right. So I've recently bought a bungalow last year, which had these 15 solar panels on the roof.
Right.
Thinking I was going to have a really low bill.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I'm going to save money. I've got my green credentials now. Actually, it's not as good as you think, and I would imagine that the poor old lady that obviously died in this property or whatever must have had dementia when she signed that contract for 25 years.
Wow. So why is it, and why is it not saving money? Is it not working?
Well, it does work, yeah. How it works is like this. While the sun shines, I can use probably about enough electric to run one appliance, yeah? That's while the sun shines. While it doesn't shine, anything you don't use while the sun is shining, which obviously this time of year is a lot, yeah, goes back into the national grid, and I get to buy it back with a 25% green levy.
Yeah, that's right. But what goes into the grid, you should get paid for, don't you, Kim?
No.
No?
Nothing, not a penny.
Wow. Okay.
Exactly.
That doesn't sound great.
Penny.
So you're saving a little bit of money when you use the electricity it generates when the sun shines, but you should be getting a tariff from your supplier.
No.
Well, what I would suggest you do, Kim, is treble check, and I'm sure you've double checked it, but treble check the wording of the contract, because that doesn't sound right, unless when it was originally done, the supplier of the solar panels paid for them, and therefore they get the receipt. Kim, thank you very much indeed for that. That was Kim in Blackpool with her concerns about solar panels. I'm actually a fan of solar panels, but you've absolutely got to get the right form of contract, and that may be the issue there. Stay with us, because coming up after the break, we're going to be talking to Sammy Wilson, MP of the DUP, about the Northern Ireland election results. It's Tice Talk on Talk TV.
I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and this is Talk TV. I think my most memorable and proudest moment in journalism over all these years is actually being on air during the lockdowns, even when I had COVID myself. Over the last 2 years, getting people to tell their stories, not just about people who lost loved ones to COVID, but people who lost their fundamental freedoms, their children's schooling, their mental health, their physical health, their businesses, and giving people the chance to tell their stories about how it affected them.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The Irish, UK and US governments have urged political parties in Northern Ireland to re-establish a devolved administration amid fears that progress on power sharing will remain stalled after Thursday's elections. The nationalist Sinn Féin party is now the biggest instalment ahead of the DUP, but it could be some time before a new administration is formed due to disagreements about post-Brexit trade arrangements. Well, the DUP says it won't form a power-sharing arrangement unless changes are made. The UK has promised an extra £1.3 billion in military aid to help Ukraine defend itself as they fight the Russian invasion. It's the biggest amount of military spending since the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in a dramatic escalation of assistance for Volodymyr Zelensky's forces. Well, it comes as Russia prepares to celebrate Victory Day tomorrow, the anniversary of the day they defeated the Nazis. In recent years, it's become a way to show off military strength with large parades of troops in Moscow. Ben Hodges used to be the commanding general of US forces in Europe, and he says Putin's push to make gains before May the 9th have been the cause of some of his problems.
I think that they were forced to start this latest offensive soon before they were ready. In part, I believe, to have something to show for Monday, tomorrow, for the Victory Day. And so the new offensive was being started before the units had been rebuilt, before they could actually get everything in place.
And the Labour Party has dismissed the latest claims that Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules by drinking beer and eating a curry with colleagues. The Mail on Sunday suggests the takeaway at a campaign event was planned. Police in Durham are investigating. That's all for now. We'll have more updates in half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV this morning. We've been talking all sorts, and of course, we've been talking about elections. My Sunday sermon was about the extraordinary results in Tower Hamlets and elsewhere in the United Kingdom. We've also had some really significant, dramatic results in the Northern Ireland Assembly elections, because for the first time ever, Sinn Féin, the Nationalist Party, the once a united Ireland, has become the biggest party in the Assembly. The Alliance Party has done well, and the DUP has lost, I think it's 3 seats. So this is really significant because, of course, at the moment the Assembly hasn't actually been sitting. It requires the DUP and Sinn Féin to want to sit together in the executive, and so far, as they were campaigning, the DUP said that unless changes were made, then they wouldn't re-sit with the executive. So I'm delighted to be joined this morning by Sammy Wilson, the DUP MP for East Antrim. Sammy, a very good morning to you. Great to have you on my show. Thank you so much for joining us. Obviously, you've had a pretty busy, dramatic, extraordinary few days. I'm quite sure you've been campaigning hard for every single vote. But in a sense, your results are obviously not what you wanted, and therefore there's lots of questions now as to what happens next, Sammy.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, of course it's not what we wanted. We've been the biggest party in Northern Ireland for the last 20 years, and because of a combination of 2 things. First of all, the nationalist vote coalescing around Sinn Féin. Don't forget, they haven't gained any seats in the Assembly. And the unionist vote breaking up amongst different parties, mainly because of the difficulties around the protocol, and also the fact that when you've been the biggest party for 20 years, you tend to get blamed for everything that happens. In fact, we were blamed for all the problems in the health service, even though we didn't hold the health minister's job. But the biggest party becomes a lightning rod for people's frustrations and anger. So the one point I would make to you is that despite all rhetoric which there has been, the nationalist vote is still behind the unionist vote in total in Northern Ireland, because most people who are sensible know that the Remain part of the United Kingdom is important.
So, Sammy, there's obviously now Sinn Féin is saying that the parties need to work together in a partnership and to get the executive and the Assembly going again, which it hasn't been, I think, since February. So what's the DUP's position now the election's over? I understand the fact, you campaign on a position, but then you've got the harsh reality of where you are now. What's the DUP's position? Will you, will you power share to try and work through this, or are you going to essentially stay with your campaign position?
Well, Richard, I mean, we're in a very difficult position. First of all, we've had promise after promise broken by the British government, by successive British governments in relation to what would happen after Brexit. Theresa May promised that Northern Ireland we treated the same as the rest of the United Kingdom, and of course she negotiated a deal which ensured that we weren't. Boris Johnson said that Theresa May's deal was rubbish and that he would never ever think of implementing it, which of course he went and did. And then after having done it and realising the damage which it does not just to Northern Ireland but to the integrity of the Union, and also to the foot in the door that it gives to the EU in the whole of the UK.
Absolutely. And so you've been campaigning to scrap the protocol.
Yeah. And so we've been saying to him, look, you've got to change it. He's made a promise to change it. He hasn't done it. The only leverage we have now, because he's got a 78 majority in Westminster, is to say, if you want to have the Belfast Agreement and its institutions working, then you have got to address the poison of the protocol.
So it seems there's sort of two ways being talked about to do that. There's either the issue of invoking Article 16 of the protocol to say it's not working, it's causing societal damage to Northern Ireland, and therefore it should be invoked. And I know that's your position, and frankly that's been my position. But the other position is interesting, whereby the government could essentially create some domestic UK legislation that completely overrides the protocol, and therefore, although it leaves it in position, that actually domestic legislation overrides it. So you get to a sort of position of almost like constructive ambiguity.
Well, either way, I'm indifferent as to which route the government chooses. I'm only interested in the outcome at the end of it. And at the end of it, I want to make sure that Brussels law cannot apply to any part of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland, that the European Court of Justice cannot impose Brussels law in any part of the United Kingdom, and whether that's done by triggering Article 16 and having renegotiations, or whether it's done by domestic legislation where the Westminster Parliament decides this is how we're going to rule the United Kingdom, I don't really care.
Okay.
But I do tell you this, Richard, and it'd be a grave mistake for the government if it thinks that we're going and we can possibly operate an executive which is bound by law to implement the Northern Ireland Protocol, to implement the destruction of the United Kingdom. We will not be doing that.
No, okay, got it. So that position is clear, that you're going to essentially insist on change. There's a variety of ways of looking at that. And the government had indicated it might bring in some legislation and announce it at the Queen's speech. That now seems to be, they seem to be sort of wilting on that. Hard to know. May just be sort of deliberate briefings. Are you confident that there's the sort of the courage, and that's what it actually takes within the UK government to do this?
No, I'm not. I mean, I look at the way in which the UK government has buckled to the EU and to France in particular on the issue of fishing. I look at the way in which the UK government has time and time again promised to do something with the protocol and done nothing about it. So I don't have any great deal of confidence. But one thing I can tell you is that the one lever that we have in our hand, we will use to the best of our ability, because there is so much at stake here. There's the integrity of the United Kingdom. There's getting Brussels' foot out of the door.
Which we all want. One final point, Sammy. The Alliance Party have done very well. They're 9 seats up, and they're sort of a centrist party. Is that voters telling both sides, telling both Sinn Féin and the unionist parties, such as yourselves, that actually people want compromise, want to get to a settlement?
Well, of course, the Alliance Party is very close to Sinn Féin, indeed probably votes on most occasions in the Assembly with Sinn Féin. They call themselves a centrist party. They're ambiguous on the union. They won't say, because they try to get votes from both sides, they won't say whether they would support remaining part of the United Kingdom or leaving the United Kingdom. I think that they've done well in this election, mainly because people are frustrated with the two big parties, but I'm not so sure that it's an indication that there's any change in people's desire to stay within the United Kingdom and to have our place stable within the United Kingdom. But, you know, we've worked in an executive for the last 20 years, Richard. We've worked in a mandatory coalition with parties that we have nothing in common with. You know, Sinn Féin are to the left of the Labour Party. We probably would be regarded as fairly right on the Conservative Party. We've had to work that coalition. We will work it if we have to.
Yeah, I get that, Sammy, but essentially you've got to see change from the UK government. I'm with you all the way on that, Sammy. Keep battling. Thank you so much for your thoughts this morning. That was Sammy Wilson, the DUP MP for East Antrim, with his thoughts about the results. Stay with us. We're going to be taking your calls as we go into the third hour and much, much more. It's Tice Talk on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV, and we have, of course, lots of fantastic shows to come up after my show finishes at 1. We've got at 1 o'clock the amazing Trisha Goddard, and then at 4, hold your horses, he's back. It's Kevin O'Sullivan, fresh from his gig last night with Mike Graham. And then at 7 o'clock, we've got the Sunday Night Club with Mark Saggers. That will be explosive too. And at 10 o'clock, we've got The Unexplained with Howard Hughes. Now, lots of messages and calls coming in. One here from a friend of mine. We were touching base earlier about the increase in standing charges. and we had a caller who was talking about his increase, and a friend of mine's just messaged me. He says, and this is unbelievable, I actually having to treble check it, that his standing charges now are higher than his actual consumption charge. This is from Mark, who I know lives in southeast London. So he's being really clever on reducing his usage, but the standing charges, and we all need to wake up and understand what's causing this massive increase in standing charges. It is the network costs of the renewables. Don't let anybody tell you or convince you they are low cost or cheap. They are not. Anyway, we've got other tweets coming in. Some people like me and some don't. So Crypto has said, first time listening to Mr. Tice, totally enjoying his style and guess. Whereas the other side of the fence, Rob says, you'd think Tice Richard, being a politician in inverted commas, that's probably fair, and knew the Fixed Term Parliament Act has been scrapped by Boris Johnson, and therefore the next general election doesn't have to happen by the end of 2024. I think what Rob was saying was he was inferring that I said that the election had to be at the end of 24. No, Rob, I do know that the Fixed Term Parliament Act has gone, and that's why I said that I think it'll be some time in 2024, but it does have to happen by the end of 2024 because, of course, that is the end of the 5-year period. So it's gone back to what it was before. Essentially, it's at the behest of the Prime Minister. Anyway, let's take a call in Maidstone, down in Kent. Rosemary is there. Good morning, Rosemary.
Good morning, Richard. Most of us like you, so don't worry.
Thank you.
I think you're great. Yes, I wanted to bring up the subject of the immigration that's coming in, because in Kent, you know, we've had it since 2004. And it's beyond the pale now, and it is worrying an awful lot of people. What I wonder is, why has nobody, or maybe somebody has and they've decided it's not a good idea, why have they not used disused cruise ships? They could have been moored in or off Dover. People could then be transferred straight onto the ships, and it'd been rather a nice place to go. And preferably a foreign flag on it as well, so they don't actually set foot on our land, on English soil. The ones with no papers would stay on board. The ones with papers could be then processed, and when full, you've got them all on board. You can sail it off to East or West Africa, wherever you want to.
No, Rosemary, actually, look, it's an interesting point, and it has been discussed, particularly, I think, during the depth of COVID, when, of course, there were no cruises. There were lots of cruise ships that essentially were not being used at all. But there's a couple of things here. One is that I think many of them, stroke all of them, are now back in use as travel has restarted again. But I think the other point is, when you've got days when there's 300, 400, 500 illegal migrants coming across the channel, you're going to fill up a cruise ship in 2 or 3 days, in a week. So, in a sense, it's a very, very short-term solution. My preference, Rosemary, is that actually, you know, I'm supportive of the Rwanda plan, because if successfully implemented, and that, of course, is a massive if that I'm very, very doubtful of, but if it was successfully implemented, the way to do it is literally to, as people arrive, they go from Dover, where they arrive, or from the beaches, and they're taken straight to the processing centre at, for example, the airport such as Manston Airport, and then flown straight from there the very same day to Rwanda, so that essentially the processing and the checking of names and everything takes place in Rwanda. That way, the human rights lawyers, they haven't got get time to get their teeth into individual cases.
Is that airport still navigable?
That's a good question, which I would have to check. But if it wasn't there, obviously, there's many other airports that flights could go from Southampton or from Gatwick.
Yes, we ought to get them there then, whereas the one in Kent's ideal, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very close, but as I say, just not. We just need to check exactly what's the status. But there are plenty of airports. But the point is, if you do it immediately, then that then starts to become a credible, proper, reliable deterrent. And at the moment, if they're taken to a processing centre and kept in the UK for weeks and weeks and weeks, then the deterrent is not there. Rosemary, thank you very much for that call there. We are going to head from Maidstone in Kent up to Derby. Mark, a very good morning. It is still just good morning.
Oh, morning, Richard. How are you? All right?
I'm good, thank you. Yes. What's on your mind this morning, Mark?
Oh, well, it's quite an interesting one, actually, because I woke up this morning, came downstairs, put the news on and Talk TV, and did a bit scout through the news channels like I normally do. And it came across the bottom of the screen that America has signed off on a lend-lease deal for the Ukraine to do with, like, arms and munitions and things like that. And it's just a funny thing that when they were looking for ideas about what they could do to improve things in the Ukraine situation, I joined the President of the United States tweet site, Boris Johnson's and President Zelensky's tweet, and I tweeted them all about 8 weeks ago to do a lend-lease deal with America, like they did in World War II, when it was the darkest days of World War II, and the UK did a lend-lease deal with America to get bombers and ships that they needed, but they didn't want to get into the confrontation and go into confrontation.
So, Mark, you're basically claiming credit for a change in policy by the President of the United States.
Yes, my partner, Tracy, is here, and I spoke to this morning and said, you remember it, don't you, Trace? I actually tweeted him about this deal weeks ago, and she was like, yeah, I totally remember it, because she was really explaining it to me, and I'm not very good with that sort of thing, so you had to explain it to me carefully what you were trying to say.
It's a really good point, Mark. I guess the only question is, for example, we've just announced, I think, another 1.3 billion of aid, both military and financial aid, when we're sending weapons and things there. And these announcements get made almost sort of twice a week now. Are we essentially lending that money to Ukraine to hopefully be repaid in years to come, or are we giving it? And of course, lend-lease is a different mechanism, because actually it is a loan that has to be repaid.
Yeah. Well, lend-lease politically means that the Americans aren't directly giving those munitions to the Ukrainians, because obviously they're worried about the escalation.
Yes, but I'm not sure Putin's that worried about the financial engineering mechanics behind it. Yeah,
I think in the long term, maybe there is something in the background that once this is all over, that there'll be a few trade deals to be done there, and the more help that we're giving, the more likely Ukraine is to be involved in using the UK to obviously recover the country after the conflict. And I can't believe that's not perhaps in the back of some people's minds about there may be some deals to be done in the future.
Oh, for sure. I mean, hopefully when this war ends sooner rather than later, I mean, the regeneration and rebuilding of large areas of Ukraine will be absolutely massive. And certainly we would hope to be there, but at the moment, the key focus has to be on stopping it. Mark, thank you so much for that thoughts. That's Mark in Derby, who is claiming the credit for changing the policy of the President of the United States. Well done, Mark. That's brilliant. We've got a tweet in here from John, who says, great show as always, Richard. The election rules are stacked against you, unfortunately, but I want you to win. Oh, thank you very much, John. Excellent. UKIP got 4 million votes, just one MP. The SDP got... the SNP, I think that says, had less votes with 57 MPs. It's a joke. It's unfair. And then John said, I thought the standing charge was to pay for bust companies. That is true, actually, John. I think an element of the standing charge is to pay for some of the suppliers that have gone bust. But I think the majority of it is this increase in network costs. Anyway, we're going to go from Mark in Derby back to Southend, where I think I've got Dave on the line. Morning, Dave.
Come on, Mr. Tice. I'll be quick because I can see the clock is ticking. Firstly, that chat that had a go at you about not standing any MPs, I don't think people understand how much money you need to set these sort of things up.
Trust me, it's a lot.
I know, and it's not, and you shouldn't do it out your own pocket, because I don't think the British electorate deserves you to sort of like lose your money. What I'll be quick to say is that you said something about the government can't do nothing about costs. I'm not sure how old you are, so you don't look like you're as old as me, but I remember Margaret Thatcher. They were really dire times. So people that say they were good times, I don't know who they were. They'll probably mention people. But Harold Wilson froze wages for everyone, CEO, Parliament, everyone, up and down the country, and he froze prices as well, I believe, with the nationalised industries. Now, also, what I'll say to you is this, Mr. Tyson, take this on board. If in 2024 you do not get a seat in Parliament, give up. Because the British public is not worth losing money and fighting for. We have a chance now with you guys and other little parties to do something about the Conservatives and Labour and the trash that is in Parliament. Please take this on board, sir. We are not worth worrying about if we do not give you this chance in 2024. You hear a lot about people giving you the vote, but when it comes down to it, the British electorate will do what they always do and turn tail and not bother.
Well, kind of you to say so, Dave. Let's wait and see, but I'm not actually someone for giving up, and we're going to battle and battle because this great country, I believe, and I think many people believe, deserves much, much better. That is Dave in Southend with his thoughts, his questions and his concerns. We've got to stick with it. We have to keep fighting for change because we're an amazing nation. I just feel that we can do so much better. We're not well led, we're not well managed, but we could be. And we have to try for it, we have to strive, and we have to keep working at it. Meanwhile, lots of tweets coming in. Someone has actually clarified for me that I was wrong about Manston. The runway is now not usable. So thanks for that. But anyway, other tweets coming in here. Rachel has said, Richard, I'm on a prepaid meter. I have to pay to have the money to keep it going. Otherwise, I've noticed it ticking down rapidly. This cannot be sustainable. How can this be? Running short of options. So many people are in that position. It is so difficult. And there will have to be change. And I think we may need to look at some form of public sector pay freeze to keep a lid on inflation. Stay with us. We're going to be talking about all things motoring with Talk Gear with Howard Hughes. It's Tice Talk on Talk TV.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 12.
Good afternoon, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The Irish, UK and US governments have urged political parties in Northern Ireland to re-establish a devolved administration amid fear that progress on power sharing will remain stalled after Thursday's elections. The nationalist Sinn Féin party is now the biggest instalment ahead of the DUP, but it could be some time before a new administration is formed due to disagreements about post-Brexit trade arrangements. Well, the DUP says it won't form a power sharing arrangement unless changes are made. Dominic Raab says the Northern Ireland Protocol must be fixed to allow Stormont to function.
We've got to fix the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol. This isn't something that's just come upon us. We've looked at it, we've talked about it. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has been engaged with the EU about it. And frankly, if the Northern Ireland Protocol had been implemented in a less dogmatic, rigid, and I have to say political way, I don't think we'd have these problems.
The UK has promised an extra £1.3 billion in military aid to help Ukraine defend itself as they fight the Russian invasion. It's the biggest amount of military spending since the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, in a dramatic escalation of assistance for Volodymyr Zelensky's forces. It comes as Russia prepares to celebrate Victory Day tomorrow, the anniversary of the day they defeated the Nazis. In recent years, it's become a way to show off military strength with large parades of troops in Moscow. Well, Ben Hodges used to be the commanding general of US forces in Europe, and he says Putin's push to make gains before May the 9th have been the cause of some of his problems.
I think that they were forced to start this latest offensive soon before they were ready. In part, I believe, to have something to show for Monday, tomorrow, for the Victory Day. And so the new offensive was being started before the units had been rebuilt, before they could actually get everything in place.
Meanwhile, 2 people have been confirmed dead and another 60 remain unaccounted for after a Ukrainian school was bombed. Around 90 people were sheltering in the basement of the building in the eastern Luhansk region. The Labour Party has dismissed the latest claims that Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules by drinking beer and eating a curry with colleagues. The Mail on Sunday suggests the takeaway at a campaign event was planned. Police in Durham are investigating. Sir Keir says he's confident he didn't breach the rules. Those are the latest news headlines. Still to come, your Talk Sport update, but first, your weather.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
A fine afternoon to come this Sunday with plenty of warm sunny spells and light winds. Temperatures will reach around 21 Celsius, well above average for early May. Taking a look at the picture for 7 o'clock, and there could just be the odd shower across western and central Scotland with temperatures around 10 to 13 Celsius. However, much of Scotland will have a fine end to the day with plenty of sunny spells. Increasing cloud for Northern Ireland with the odd light shower too. However, Northern England will be fine with plenty of dry weather and temperatures still around 18 degrees. Wales and the rest of England will also have a fine end to the day with plenty of sunshine and an increasing risk of rain for the far northwest as we end the day.
Trust us to take you there. Times Travel sponsors Talk TV weather.
Manchester City can put one hand on the Premier League title this afternoon with a win against Newcastle United. It's after rivals Liverpool were held to a 1-1 draw by Tottenham. Manager Jurgen Klopp has conceded that he can't imagine City dropping any points.
I would love to sit here and say, yes, City will drop points. The only problem is I can't see it. That's the problem. I would wish I would think differently about it. It's just I can't see it.
Pep Guardiola's side can move 3 points clear with 3 games remaining if they win today. And elsewhere, Arsenal will hope a win against Leeds United can consolidate their position in the top 4. In Formula 1, and Max Verstappen faces an uphill battle to win the inaugural Miami Grand Prix. The world champion made an error in his final run in qualifying yesterday, placing him 3rd behind the Ferraris of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. Lewis Hamilton starts the race in 5th, with Mercedes still struggling for pace 5 races into the season. And Novak Djokovic crashed out of the Madrid Open in a shock defeat to rising star Carlos Alcaraz. The 19-year-old stunned the world #1 just a day after a victory against Rafael Nadal. He's progressed to this afternoon's final, where he'll face defending champion Alexander Zverev. That's all for now. I'll be back with more in half an hour.
I'm Jeremy Kyle, and this is Talk TV. What makes me really angry? Injustice, lies, and people not able to say what they feel without fear of being just cast aside, cancelled, whatever you want to say.
Welcome back to Tice Talk, and a very good afternoon to one and all. Well, it's a good afternoon for my production team, but less so for me, because there's been an extraordinary gross injustice just occurred during the break, in that Graham Norton, who's in the studio next door, he had a massive cheesecake, and he had a spare slice or two, and it got offered to the production team, but not here in the studio. So I've still got to go hungry until lunchtime. Anyway, we need to get back to matters important, and I'm now creating a new segment to my show once a month, which is to talk about another aspect of the cost of living, which is, of course, the cost of motoring, the cost of travel, the cost of moving around. And so I'm going to call this segment Talk Gear. Most cars have gears, some don't. But anyway, and I'm delighted that this segment, I'm always going to be joined in the studio by the one and only Howard Cox, the founder of the main lobbying group for motorists, Fair Fuel UK. Howard's with me in the studio. He's cut himself shaving this morning in the excitement of coming into the show. But anyway, Howard, welcome. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us in the show. And this is, I think, a really important opportunity, because motoring is such a huge part of people's just going about their daily business, whether it's going to work, whether it's seeing family and things. And everyone, do please give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your views and experiences, how the increase in fuel costs is affecting your lives, whether you're going to work less, whether you are having to change the way that you, if you're a tradesman, for example, change the clients you can go to, or indeed whether you're having to reduce visits to families, visits to friends, just because of the cost of getting around. Or maybe it's a good thing that we're doing less travelling. Maybe the Greens and the environmentalists think this is absolutely fantastic. So, Howard, you've just done a big survey, because you've got a huge membership, haven't you? And you've got about, and this is an exclusive on Talk Gear here on Tice Talk, you've had a response for about 40,000 surveys on the key issues, the top political priorities amongst your supporters. Tell us the headline, Howard, of what you've discovered.
Firstly, thank you, Richard, for being on your show, and it's an honour to be here. Yeah, the important thing to understand about the survey is, and this is the reason why Fairfield UK was set up 13, 14 years ago, is because, for some reason, all governments seem to be anti-driver. There are 37 million drivers in this country, and they contribute the 4th largest income to the Treasury, and they're taken, well, for advantage, I'd like to say a stronger word, but they are actually fundamentally taken for a ride, and I'm sorry to use a pun. We did a survey, and we do this survey regularly. It's a political opinion survey, and always we get an incredible response. We've had 1.7 million sign-ups since 2010, and wow, nearly always 40 to 50,000 take part in our polls. And we simply asked questions which everyone is on their lips on a daily basis, and what the question is about the cost of living. And the biggest cost of living factor at the moment, of course, is energy, and one of those is filling the car, petrol and diesel. And we're looking still, even with that wonderful 5p cut in fuel duty we got in the spring statement about 6 weeks ago, that hasn't appeared at the pumps, and I think I'd love to hear your callers, if they could come and tell us if they've actually seen a 6p.
That's right, and please do get in touch during the show. Howard's with me until 12:30, whether you've noticed a reduction in prices since the change in the fuel duty in the budget. I certainly haven't. and Howard, it sounds like your listeners haven't either.
Well, something like about 80% of people who've responded in the polls have said they've not seen it. They were told it had to be done at 6:30 on the day of the spring statement. Understandably, there was obviously bulk buying, there was some, forward buying and that sort of thing, and the stocks had to be paid for. But it's interesting, it doesn't happen the other way round, does it? When the pump prices actually go up, they're doing it on the existing stock as well. So there's a lot of hypocrisy here. But this survey, fundamentally, we asked them questions, and the top 4 issues regarding the cost of living that came up by a massive way was reduce energy prices, reduce the cost of living itself, reduce pump prices, and reduce NHS waiting lists. They're the 4 prime things. Nothing about Beergate or Partygate. This is all about the cost of living.
This is remarkable because you've got a survey of some 40,000 drivers. What should be the government's top political priorities? And numbers 1, 2, 3 are all about different forms of prices. Energy prices, the cost of living, which obviously includes food and things, and then pump prices, the cost of getting around. And, that's ahead of reduce NHS waiting lists.
It is, and I think it's important to understand. You said drivers. These are road users, including cyclists. This is taking up something like 2,000 of the respondents in this were cyclists.
Okay.
And half of those agreed with drivers because they drive as well, a lot of the cyclists.
Sure.
But we asked them, what is your prime form of transport? And so we could actually segregate them in that factor. But if you can see number 18 right at the bottom, they don't want the government really... only 11%, that's about 1 in 10, want to dedicate more time to net zero policies. It's about the cost of living, not about the green environment issues.
And actually, those first 3 things, it's all about cost. Now... it's easy to say reduce pump prices. Let's just remind ourselves, please, Howard, how much of the cost of a litre of fuel is tax?
Well, you're looking at, up until the spring statement, it was 57.95p per litre. And don't forget there's VAT on top of that, a tax on a tax, a double taxation, which I think is immoral. But you're looking at something like, at the moment in time, about half what goes into the tank is its tax.
OK, so let's be clear, 57.9 plus 20% VAT.
Yes.
On that tax?
Yeah, on the tax, on the 20% on the whole amount of what you put in the tank, which includes the fuel duty.
OK.
And that's the immoral part, the double taxation aspect. I've often challenged this, whether this is illegal. And I haven't got enough money to do it, and I'd love to get some support on that one to try and challenge that, because I think it's immoral. It's not fair that you're paying 2 taxes on the same thing.
So essentially that means quick sort of maths is that it's about 66 pence per litre.
Correct.
Is tax. So if the Chancellor was to say, well, actually, I'm going to reduce it by 10p a litre to make a difference, how much would that notionally cost the Treasury before you factor in additional growth? Yeah,
you're looking at really... on the back of a fag packet calculation, this is a fair way to put it. For every penny cut in fuel duty, you're looking at about £400 to £500 million they lose, they say. 10p would mean about £4 to £5 billion lost to the Treasury. But what they don't say, and this is the important thing, and this is a Conservative government, remember, and something like 400 taxes have gone up since they've been in power. You're looking at something like the fact that when they... Well, in fact, the Treasury actually produced a report back in 2014 that cutting fuel duty is good for the economy, good for GDP, good for wages, good for jobs. They've actually said it. So they've set a precedent. And the CEBR, the Centre for Economic Business Research, who I work very closely with, they've done several reports, independent reports, to show that cutting fuel duty is good for the economy. But we've always talked about 3 or 4p cut. But if you cut it by 10p, and I would go even further and say 20 pence, yes, it would cost £10 billion. And bear in mind the overseas aid is something like 14 billion.
Yes.
Something like that sort of thing. Yes, we could cut our overseas aid by 2/3 and actually get the economy motoring beyond belief.
Well, this is the point, isn't it? That actually lower taxes creates higher growth.
Yes.
It creates more activity, more growth, which means in the medium term you'll get higher revenues. Just while we've been talking, Howard, a tweet's come in here from Carl, who says, "Hi Richard, just been to Asda in North Cardiff, and diesel has gone up by 2 pence since last week to 173.7. Hashtag rip off Britain."
Absolutely. In fact, it's still a good price in terms of diesel, because diesel's averaging 177 across the country. Wow. And on the way to the station, when British Rail allowed me to get on the train, I went past a station and it's 182 diesel. I mean, it's ridiculous, the price of this. And diesel is an interesting one. You bring that one up. That's the commercial heartbeat of any economy. All our trucks, all our vans and all those sorts of things, and everything that's delivered to us relies on something that's driven by a diesel engine. And the important thing is that we're the only economy in the world that has diesel priced higher than petrol.
Wow.
And it's because the rest of the world actually recognise diesel as the commercial heartbeat, and they actually subsidise the wrong word. They have lower tax on diesel compared to petrol. Why don't we do that here?
Well, yes, but of course, actually, when we were all urged to buy diesel cars back in the mid-noughties by the Labour government, then diesel was cheaper, wasn't it?
That's correct.
And then we all bought the diesel cars, and guess what happened?
Yes.
They put more tax on diesel, and the price of diesel went up.
Talk about opportunism. This is the way they work, and it's sad because I actually wrote an article for the 2019 election about which party is the best friend for drivers, and I naturally said the Conservatives. How wrong I was.
I'm afraid so. I'm afraid it just feels to me that let's remind ourselves. Back in the middle of 2020, when I still had a diesel car. Down in Kent, I was getting fuel at less than £1.10 per litre.
Yes.
Diesel.
Yes.
And here we are, 170, 180. I'm guessing in some service stations, it's give or take £2.
And let's not talk about good old motorway service stations, which are over £2, well over £2. It's disgusting. You're looking at, in that time you're talking about, a 50% increase in what we put in our tanks. And at the same time, the Shell boss and the BP boss have enjoyed £25 million of revenue, personally.
Yeah, I mean, we just know it's wrong, and please do give us a call, 0344 499 1000, with your experiences on this. What changes have you had to make to your lives, to the way you go about your work, to the family, the friends that you see? Give us a call and we'll put your question to Howard. Maybe you've got the other view. Maybe you've got an electric car and you think that actually this is all a good thing. I want to get a proper debate going on this. We're going to be talking about this once a month with Howard. And he's here until 12:30. Stay with us. You are listening to the home of common sense. It's Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk here this afternoon on Talk TV. It is still a glorious sunny day this Sunday, but there's not much glorious going on at petrol stations and the pumps because of the cost of fuel. I'm talking to Howard Cox of Fair Fuel UK. So, Howard, I mean, you know, the prices are going through the roof. You're talking there just about almost £2 a litre, and we've got various messages coming through. One here from William, who tweets in, interesting idea, every fuel station should be forced to show the cost of fuel before and after tax. That way we could see how much they're pocketing. Duty and VAT should be shown separately on the receipt. That would make it more transparent. That's an interesting idea.
Well, about 3 years ago, Peter Aldous, MP for Waveney, I think it is. I can't remember where he is now. But he actually did a 10-minute rule bill with me, and saying, can we have all taxes displayed transparently on all receipts? You're absolutely right. And, you know, why we're not doing this, I don't know. All we get is VAT. We don't get the fuel duty because it's the biggest component, don't forget. It's a huge component. At that point, we're looking at 70%. You talk about £1.20.
Yes.
If you take, you know, the 57 point, 65p, you're looking at about nearly 70% of what goes into the tank. So that could have been declared on receipts. You're right.
A really good point, William. Thank you so much for that. Keep those coming in. And we've got a caller, Vic from Shropshire, with a question. Good afternoon, Vic. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Richard. It's nice to talk to you, my man.
And to you too. So tell me, Vic, what's on your mind? Have you got a question for Howard? Have you had to change how much you're driving, the family that you are?
Well, actually, I'm in the process. I'm in the trade, or was in the trade of vehicles and fuel. In actual fact, what I used to do is I used to convert cars to gas.
Right.
And one of the questions I've got for Howard is, Howard, why is it you talk about diesel and petrol? Because if you were to convert all the cars that actually are on the road, which you could do quite easily with the £3,000 that was being given to people that buy electric cars,
yes,
to convert them to gas, firstly you would get rid of a lot of the emissions. It's all about emissions, then it would actually solve that problem practically overnight. The other thing is that gas actually is a lot cheaper. It's only, 65p now. I actually approached my MP with this and actually put it in front of him, Philip Dunn, and he turned around and he thought it was quite a good idea, then went away to Parliament, came back and didn't think it was such a good idea.
Funny that.
Yeah, it's the cheapest, yeah.
Vic, great question. Howard, what's the answer?
Well, it's interesting. The Autogos group, the association, actually backed Fairfield UK for a period of time, and I'm a big supporter of it. You're absolutely right. I've got no problem about it. Some of the performance dropped a little bit, not by much. It's not that noticeable. The pick-up in terms of acceleration, some people complain about, etc. But you could argue that people are having the same problem with E10 at the moment because we've gone from E5 to E10. There's all sorts of issues, but that should be one of the alternatives rather than us forcing us into one direction, i.e. electric vehicles. And can I just say, before Richard has a go at me about this, electric vehicles I'm a big fan of. I've got no problem, but I'm anti the government making us drive one modal form of fuel transport. Let's work together on technology that's developing anyway. Don't let politicians dictate what we drive.
And what's the tax on gas?
It's the same.
It's the same?
Yeah.
So Vic, when you said the price of, what did you say, about 60p?
65p. You used to be able to get it for about 55,
That's
45,
correct.
55.
But is that before tax?
Yes, it is. I mean, I actually haven't got it with me, the autogas costs now at the pumps. Now, I'd like someone to come into the latest things. It's a bit remiss of me not having that at my fingertips. But it is cheaper than diesel and petrol, yes.
Right.
Well, actually, if you... Can I speak?
Go for it, Vic.
Actually, if you go to local... services now...
Vic, we just lost you there. If you go where?
Go to the motorway services on the M54, it's 65p. That's motorway prices.
Yeah. And
it's
in terms...
cheaper if you do the other... I mean, the government's basically tried to crucify gas.
That's correct.
Get rid of it.
I'm on your side. I really am on your side on this one, and we should be looking at it. It should be all thrown into the melting pot of fuels we should choose to use. You're right about the lower emissions too. You're totally right about that. It's better than petrol and diesel. But the point is the government are scared of using this sort of thing, and you're dead right about that.
But why is that? I mean, why do you think that is, Vic? That seems a bit odd.
Well, if you really want what's going on, they are going to try and force everybody into electric cars.
Yes, we know that.
Okay, yeah, but they can't afford, not everybody will be able to afford an electric car. No, they can't afford to buy the batteries for every car for everybody to have an electric car, so it's nonsense. Okay? But the thing what they'll do is you'll end up with an autonomous car, which you'll end up with a phone, and you'll have the car come around and pick you up. And that's what you'll do. You won't own the car anymore. That's where they're trying to put you. Now, this is going to force you in the end to go in on public transport to go any distance. And if you want to go local, you're going to have to go in an autonomous electric car. That's the ultimate aim of this.
But in reality, if you live in the countryside, like a wonderful area, rural area like Shropshire, Vic, then there's not that much public transport. I know that when we were campaigning in North Shropshire just before Christmas.
Yeah, I know. I was talking to you about it.
Exactly.
Okay. Actually, I was in Shropshire helping you. But the thing about it is I actually live in an isolated place. There's 4 houses and two farms. That's it. And the nearest shop is 5 miles away from me.
So there's not much public transport there.
No, but another little thing about diesel, is that the big thing that's really going to hit people is them taking away red diesel.
Yes.
Most people don't realise that effect that's going to have on everybody. The farmers out here are going to have a big deal with it.
It's a massive one. It's now being taxed at the same rate as normal white diesel. The only ones that you can actually qualify to get some discount on this if you are a farmer, but it's got to be you've got to fill in a hell of a lot of forms to get that discount.
Well, you can only use it on certain things as well.
Exactly.
My brother actually runs a shoot down in South Wales, and he relies on generators, and his cost is going to more than double just on that part. And it's like building sites. Everybody who uses it, I mean, the steelworks use massive amounts of red diesel. I mean, it's going to put them out of business.
So it really is. Vic, just before we let you go, Vic, are you or your friends having to change habits, not seeing family and friends as much because of the cost of fuel?
Well, actually, I mean, I've even bought an electric bike, which is probably a better idea than a car. Okay, but
so that's reduced your costs?
Yes, that will reduce some of my costs. But the thing about it is, you can't get round it. Here, you've got to use a vehicle of some sort.
You have. Vic, thank you so much indeed for that. We've had a couple of tweets whilst we've been on. One here from Tony who says, just wondering why petrol is more expensive in Scotland rather than England. Surely it should be cheaper because it's less of a distance to supply it.
It's because they can. And that's what the sort of situation. This is why we're calling for a body called Pump Watch.
Right.
We want this body to expose the fuel supply chain opportunistic profiteering. They can do what they want. Can someone tell me when oil was $100 3 years ago, when pump prices were around about £1.10, £1.20?
Yes.
They're about 110 now, and we're looking at £1.70 now. Please tell me why. Because that's what I've asked the government to get, and the backbench MPs are supporting Pump Watch, and I would love your listeners to support it.
And final tweet here just come in whilst we've been talking, Howard, from William, who says, how will young people who pass their driving test be able to afford a car if we can only drive EVs? The banning them is going to dramatically change society.
Well, that's a rhetorical question. I couldn't answer it. Simply, they cannot afford it. We're in a situation now where the government are not listening. They're anti-driver, and this is why we're calling on everyone to start supporting drivers, because they're not getting any representation in Parliament.
It's right, of course. The Green lobby, they love it. If we're driving less, they think it's marvellous. But actually, it's not good for the economy. It's not good for jobs, and I don't think it's good for people's mental health as well. It just doesn't quite feel right. Howard, great to see you. Thank you so much for coming into the studio. We're going to do this every month. All of you listening and watching this, Talk Gear is a regular item once a month. So think up your questions, send them in, your views, your concerns, because we've got to provide answers. We've got to help people get through this crisis. Reducing the cost of driving any which way we can is a vital part of that. Stay with us. Coming up, we're going to be talking to Mark Galliotti. You're listening to Tice Talk here at Talk TV.
I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, and this is Talk TV. I think my most memorable and proudest moment in journalism over all these years is actually being on air during the lockdowns, even when I had COVID myself. Over the last 2 years, getting people to tell their stories, not just about people who lost loved ones to COVID, but people who lost their fundamental freedoms, their children's schooling, their mental health, their physical health, their businesses, and giving people a chance to tell their stories about how it affected them.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Emily Rose Adams. The Irish, UK and US governments have urged political parties in Northern Ireland to re-establish a devolved administration amid fears that progress on power sharing will remain stalled after Thursday's elections. The nationalist Sinn Féin party is now the biggest instalment ahead of the DUP, but it could be some time before a new administration is formed due to disagreements about post-Brexit trade arrangements. The DUP says it won't form a power sharing arrangement unless changes are made. And Dominic Raab says the Northern Ireland Protocol must be fixed to allow Stormont to function.
We've got to fix the problems of the Northern Ireland Protocol. This isn't something that's just come upon us. We've looked at it, we've talked about it. Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, has been engaged with the EU about it. And frankly, if the Northern Ireland Protocol had been implemented in a less dogmatic, rigid, and I have to say political way, I don't think we'd have these problems.
The UK has promised an extra £1.3 billion in military aid to help Ukraine defend itself as they fight the Russian invasion. It's the biggest amount of military spending since the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and a dramatic escalation of assistance for Volodymyr Zelensky's forces. Meanwhile, 2 people have been confirmed dead and another 60 remain unaccounted for after a Ukrainian school was bombed. Around 90 people were sheltering in the basement of the building in the eastern Luhansk region. And the Labour Party has dismissed the latest claims that Sir Keir Starmer broke lockdown rules by drinking beer and eating a curry with colleagues. The Mail on Sunday suggests the takeaway at a campaign event was planned, and police in Durham are investigating. Sir Keir Starmer says he's confident that he didn't breach the rules. That's all for now. We'll have more news updates in around half an hour.
Welcome back to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Good afternoon, live from the Talk Radio studios here in central London. It's a glorious afternoon. Hopefully you're having fun, doing what people should be doing, relaxing. You may be driving. You may have heard Howard Cox there with his thoughts, his concerns about the cost of fuel. Really interesting tweet came in from Mr. Watchman. I have an LPG car. Between 70 to 99p a litre. Some stations are cheaper, but the Autogas Shell stations have now closed their pumps and dug up the tanks. It's disgusting as a clean fuel is no longer promoted. Keep those tweets and calls and messages coming in, and we'll do Talk Gear once a month with Howard Cox. Now, we've obviously got to talk about what's going on in Ukraine and President Putin in Russia, what pressure is being exerted on him from the Russian population. And who better to talk about that than Mark Galeotti, Director of American Intelligence and author of The Weaponization of Everything and an expert in Russian affairs. And Mark's written a fascinating piece in today's Sunday Times. Mark, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. So we're sending more money, there seem to be more announcements twice a week of more money for weapons, military aid and other aid to Ukraine. But tomorrow's Victory Day, isn't it, in Russia? And everybody's been sort of honed in on that and what President Putin might want to try and achieve or announce. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, to be honest, and look, it's very dangerous trying to predict what Putin's going to do these days. But nonetheless, I don't think that tomorrow is going to be quite as big a deal as some fear. Victory Day is this, in some ways, it's the high holy day of Putinism. It's this extraordinary, basically, festival of everything victorious. And it's a day which is meant to just simply convey to Russians that we are one people and we are a nation of victors. The things that we've been worried about, there's the possibility that, for example, he will turn this from being what he calls a special military operation into a war, to announce some kind of national mobilization, those kind of things. There's no way of getting around the fact that that would actually mean admitting failure. It would mean that his initial strategy had not worked. And if there's one day in the year you don't want to be admitting failure, it's going to be on Victory Day. So I think tomorrow we're going to see the usual patriotic bombast. We're going to see Zeds everywhere. We're going to see Putin claiming that the mission's almost accomplished and it's been tremendously successful. But For me, I think the whole issue is, OK, but what happens the day after? What happens the day after that? I think that we shouldn't focus too much on tomorrow. I think it's actually after that Putin's going to have to make some tough choices.
Because you referred in your article in the Sunday Times to, in a sense, the pressures emerging from two sides in Russia, in Moscow. You've got obviously the sort of the liberals who become a bit more used to travelling, and international business people who are clearly regretting the loss of that because of the sanctions. But then you referred to the sort of the nationalist hardliners on the other side who think that Putin may be doing badly, made some wrong judgments, but actually want Russia to be stronger, tougher and go further.
Yeah, this is one of the interesting things. I think historically we've tended to ignore the hardliners, or the hardline critique of Putin, shall we say. And we focus on the liberals, the people who sort of manage the economy. And it's understandable, because also these are the sort of the academics and the policy makers and the business people who are anyway more likely to talk to Western journalists and everything else. However, there is this quite strong nationalist critique of Putin, and has been for a long time. This sense of, look, yeah, he puffs himself up as Russia's greatest champion. But in fact, they're very aware that he's corrupt, that so much of the money that is being spent is actually being wasted and by, stolen by his cronies, and that he talks a good game. And I think this is what we're beginning to see now. We're not beginning. I don't want to make it sound as if we're going to see some kind of coup next Thursday or something, but this notion of there are people who didn't have a problem with the idea that Ukraine needs to be taught a lesson, Ukraine needs to be shown who's boss, but they do have a problem with it being done so damn badly. And I think this is actually worrying, because these people they're not business people and such like. They're soldiers, they're secret policemen, they're people with real power.
OK, so they, in a sense, they, like Putin, can't be seen and couldn't accept that Russia could be seen to be losing this war. And in a sense, that's the greatest point of danger, isn't it? That Putin can't be seen to lose the war for some of the pressures on both sides, but particularly from those sort of hardliners. Equally, Ukraine and the West, we can't be seen to, in a sense, give in to Putin, because otherwise what comes next?
Yeah, and it's interesting that Zelensky has been talking, including with people in the UK, about precisely what will be the basis for talks, what might be the basis for peace. And it's interesting that, he is actually talking much more moderately than, say, Liz Truss, who was more or less suggesting, every Russian soldier has to be out of every square inch of Ukrainian soil. Whereas Zelensky is essentially hinting that a deal could be struck that maybe sees Crimea lost to the Russians, because the Russians regard Crimea as basically historically theirs, and maybe even the little bits of the Donbass that were occupied before the 24th of February. So the interesting thing is, Zelensky clearly realizes this. The whole question is, whether we can actually reach some kind of a compromise. And I think at the moment with Putin, the answer is no.
Okay,
I don't think Putin's ready to do that.
And in a sense, I'm not sure the West is ready. But let's say, and let's be optimistic and hope that a compromise can be reached. The issue that troubles me is that actually what happens to sanctions after that? Because for me, I don't think we go back to business as usual and pretend that, all is fine and dandy and that we keep buying everything from Russia whilst Putin's still in charge. Surely there has to be some recognition that what he did is unacceptable for as long as he's in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. There can be no sort of forgive and forget moment. I think it's going to be a really difficult issue because, look, if the Russians are going to reach any kind of a peace deal with Ukraine, they will expect some sanctions relief. Otherwise, frankly, there's not much point.
Indeed.
Putin can just simply stop attacking. But if we want peace, he's going to want that. And this is going to be a tricky issue because then how much are we willing to give and so forth. But conversely, there has to be sanctions maintained, particularly the core ones on the central bank and on anything connected with the Russian military. And I think this is going to be the difficult thing of unpicking the sanctions regime, which we're willing to give ground on and which are absolutely not to be moved.
And because, of course, in a sense, what we've learned is we can't be dependent on him, we can't trust him. And so for me, the other big issue would be energy, gas and oil, that there would have to be sanctions continuing on that for a very long time.
In a way, perversely, I think that's an area I'm not too worried about, because in some ways I think that ship has already sailed. I mean, I think it's pretty clear exactly how dangerous it is. We don't need sanctions to remind countries of what can happen if you become dependent on Russian oil and gas.
Fair point.
So, yes, I mean, you know, we can keep sanctions or we can not keep sanctions, but the key thing is to ensure that we don't have that dependency. But again, it's this delicate balance, because ironically, we do not want to push Putin into an absolute corner, which is the kind of thing you were implying before. You know, if this is a man who thinks his choices are stark between total surrender and escalation, he's going to escalate.
Yes.
He has nothing to lose.
He's got nothing to lose. Mark, that's a very good point on which to finish with. Thank you so much indeed for those thoughts from Mark Galeotti, Director of the Merck Intelligence Consultancy and author of The Weaponisation of Everything, a real expert on Russia, with what might some form of compromise deal look like going forwards. We all want this war to end, but there has to be an understanding of what it looks like after that. Who's seen to lose, who's seen to win, who's seen to compromise. Stay with us, we're taking your calls, 0344 499 1000. It's Tice Talk on Talk TV. Welcome back to Tice Talk. We're in the last segment of the show before at 1 o'clock the amazing Trisha Goddard will be coming up live from Connecticut. We've got lots of tweets coming in here. One here from RC7. Richard, I live in a terrace street. I could never park out my car outside. How could I charge an electric car if I can't park my car outside my own home? Run a cable across the street and up the pavement and down the street. Hashtag silly bullies. A very fair point. Meanwhile, we've got a tweet here from Puff, who says, appreciate, Richard, you actually believe the government's fascist censorship means that we know nothing about Ukraine, but actually we know a lot more than you. For example, he goes on the 6th of May, the UN unanimously voted for all countries to work for peace. This includes no more weapons sent by the British taxpayer. Well, actually, in order to secure peace, actually you have to have a deterrent. If you don't have a deterrent, Puff, then you're not going to get peace, are you? That's why a nuclear deterrent works. That's why I would venture to suggest that Russia hasn't gone into any NATO country, because it's concerned about the deterrent of NATO. But I appreciate the text. It's good to have a range of views and thoughts, and no one side knows everything, least of all me. Thank you for that. In East Sussex, we're going to go to Amanda. Good afternoon.
Good, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. What's on your mind, Amanda?
Okay, yes. Well, it's actually quite coincidental that you decided to highlight the results of the Tower Hamlets elections today on your show.
Yes.
Because it's very strange, because last year I became concerned about the Greater London Assembly elections for something came to my attention, and I decided to look into it. So I did some investigating last year, and I found out that Greater London Assembly, the lady who's responsible for the election processes for Greater London, she signed a contract with an electronic voting machine company called CGI. And when I looked further into CGI, it became more and more apparent that this needs to be looked into, because they've been using these same voting machines for the Scottish elections, both in 2012 and the last elections up there, which I think was 2017 or something. And this contract with Greater London Assembly has been signed and was used for the 2020 elections in Greater London. And I'm not sure if it counts for if they do the same process for the local elections that have just been held. But if they do use them in the same local elections, then that needs to be investigated.
And Amanda, do you know actually what these machines do? I mean, they have electronic machines where I think you press a button or you pull a lever in the States, which is different.
Yeah.
Are these counting machines that essentially you put the ballot papers into, and then they just, in a sense, sort of flick them through the machine and count them? Is that what they are?
I believe so. What I do know is that there is a huge lawsuit in the United States concerning the same software that is used in these machines that are run by the company CGI that have been contracted to provide them for the Greater London Assembly elections. So in other words, the actual software that's inside of the machines is operated and was developed by a company called Smartmatic. Now, the Smartmatic company is also UK-based, but it's a separate company. But the discrepancy with this, or I should say the allegations around this in the United States, are that the Smartmatic software is hackable and has been used to rig elections in the United States.
Interesting. Well, obviously,
election.
As you say, Amanda, these are just allegations. I don't know about these companies, and we. On the show, we could, for example, get them on to ask them about this. I wasn't actually aware that counting machines were used. Certainly, all the halls I've ever been to, the ballot papers are being sort of counted and very often sort of put into piles and then recounted. But it's an interesting point, Amanda, and one that clearly people should be aware of. Thank you so much for bringing that to my attention about the use possibly of counting machines for ballot papers. I love technology, but it has to work, and it has to work accurately. That is for sure. We're going to head from East Sussex up to Burnley, where I think Stuart is there. Good afternoon, Stuart.
Oh, good afternoon, Richard. Just to let you know, I canvassed for you in Hartlepool.
Oh, thank you very much.
I stood for the Brexit Party in Burnley in 2019.
Thank you, Stuart. Great you're listening. Thanks. I really appreciate that. So, how's things in Burnley? What's on your mind? What's bugging you?
Apart from we got beat yesterday, I'm just getting over that. But
you and Alistair Campbell.
yeah, I saw him actually. I saw him yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah. What it is, I've been thinking about this for a little while. It's the fuel situation. What do you think about boycotts? What I'm getting at is, I know some people have got no option because they've got a fuel card, or the company may use certain garages. But as consumers, we've got a lot of power. So, say for instance, if we started a campaign to say, look, we're just not going to touch Shell or BP garages, we'll go somewhere else. We'll go to Tesco, we'll go to Asda, we'll go to wherever. Do you think it would start a bit of a price war? Within a couple of weeks, they'd start to drop the prices. I just wonder what your thoughts on that was.
It's a really good question, Stuart, and one that I've actually almost never seen raised before. But quite often it's hard to know of the pricing power of the different companies, because many of the Shell and BP, you see them at the forecourt, but actually they're individual franchises. And sometimes the price is set by Shell or BP, for example, and sometimes it's tweaked and adjusted by the franchise holder. And I just wonder, given I think the number of fuel stations is declining, whether or not people have really got the choice in order to exercise that consumer power.
Yeah, well, there seems to be a lot of there's Texaco in there, and there's quite a few, and there's these new EG garages coming up. There's a lot of options, especially like supermarkets. I don't know if they're all linked with BP and Shell, but I just can't see why we just have to accept it. It's like, it jumps up like almost immediately, or within a week or so, from sort of around the 130, 140 to like 170. I'm a diesel driver, and everybody just takes it on the chin, and it's like, well, what do we do? Do we just wait until it goes to 210, 220, or do we do what Extinction Rebellion do? It's like gluing ourselves to the forecourt so they can't drive in. We've got to do something, haven't we?
Well, it's such an interesting point you raised, Stuart, because the whole thing is essentially it's a form of monopoly, because fuel comes from a few refineries. Taxation obviously comes from the government, and for most people actually there isn't much they can do because we've got to get to work, and we've got to carry out our daily lives and look after our family and stuff, and the only thing people can end up doing is just reducing the number of trips.
Yeah. I just think there's massive frustration.
Oh, massive frustration. And I mean, as you say,
electricity as well. It's the same thing. It's very difficult, as you say, whether or not people get frustrated enough on the driving side of this, as opposed to the green lobby side of this, that actually they say, well, we're going to adopt similar tactics to the likes of Extinction Rebellion. Who knows? All I say is don't obstruct, protest, but don't obstruct. Stuart, thank you so much for those thoughts on that. What can consumers do about it? Well, let's go to North Yorkshire, where Emma is, I think, on the other end of the line. Good afternoon, Emma.
Good afternoon, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm all right. What's on your mind?
Oh, well, my brain's overthinking, as it does.
Excellent.
Too much, especially in these mad worlds that we find ourselves in. And I find myself wondering, how many deaths do you think were actually of COVID? How many were from the lockdowns and the stress, suicide, lack of treatment, misuse of certain drugs that we probably won't want to mention right now? Peru, one of the strictest lockdowns, and they've got the worst deaths.
You're right. It's such a good question. I don't think we'll ever really know the difference between how many died of COVID and how many people died with COVID who actually had comorbidities, other ailments, for whatever reason. Remembering, of course...
I don't think people mind. They think it's a genuine death if someone died of COVID, but they just happen to have diabetes. That's still a COVID death to me. It's where they go down as a COVID death because they tested positive, but they died in a car accident.
For sure. I think the answer is it's a modest fraction of the deaths that have been allocated as being with COVID, as I say. Yeah. It's well below 50%, in my view. We'll never really know.
In America, the average flu cases is about 35 million, I think. And then in 2021, they had about 1,000.
Yeah, well, and it was the same. It was the same here in the UK. Flu essentially disappeared because it was overridden by COVID. Not Amanda. Yeah, Emma, thank you so much. Only because I've got to finish the show and hand over to Tricia. Thank you for your call. Keep listening to us on Tice Talk. Now, that's me almost done. But for the next 3 hours, we have the amazing Tricia Goddard, live from Connecticut. Good afternoon, Tricia.
Good afternoon, Richard.
How are you?
Lovely. I'm very well, thank you. It's Mother's Day over here in the USA. I'm quite lucky. Yes, I'm quite lucky because being a Brit, I have a Mother's Day there, and being an Australian as well, I've got a Mother's Day in Australia and America today. So there you go. I'm a very lucky person. We've got a really interesting show coming up. Next week is Mental Health Awareness Week, and the theme is loneliness. And actually, one of your callers actually brought up a very good point, because loneliness and depression shot up during the COVID lockdown.
Massively.
So we'll be talking massively. We'll be talking to psychotherapist Julia Samuel about that. As you may remember, she's Prince George's godmother and was a friend of Princess Diana's, but she's a brilliant clinician. Also, we'll be looking at Roe versus Wade and the whole discussion around abortion rights. We'll look at it through our faithful panel. We have an imam and a rabbi discussing their approach to abortion and